Before there were maps, there were two worlds. The world you know, and the shining realm of Qaf, hidden just beyond it. A kingdom of fairies and giants and magic. On the night he was born, an emperor 1,000 miles away woke from a dream. A black crow that stole his crown, and a bright hawk that flew out of the west to win it back. And the wise men said, "That hawk is a child, and he will shake the thrones of the world." That same night, the fairies of Qaf carried the sleeping baby across the sky. They blessed him, and they touched his eyes, so that nothing hidden could ever hide from him again. His name was Hamza. He would become the bravest champion the world had ever seen. Strong as a lion, a warrior against 100 armies, a prince who lost his heart to a princess, and at his side, the cleverest trickster who ever lived. Amar, a thief of 1,000 disguises, and the truest friend a hero ever had. Together, they crossed burning deserts and enchanted mountains. They faced sorcerers and giants and dragons and the demon armies of Qaf. They saw wonders no eye had ever seen. Thrones that flew, cities of gold, gardens that bloomed in the dark, courage, magic, love, and laughter. One of the greatest stories ever told, carried for 1,000 years. And now, it is yours. This is the Dastan-e-Amir Hamza. That before there were maps, there were two realms. The realm of the world, which you know, and the realm of Qaf, which knows you. And one night, between them, an emperor dreamed. Mark this man well. Narrator, king of kings of the 7 realms, who ruled the world from Ctesiphon and could not rule his own fear. Every mercy in him was real. Not one could hold its ground against a dream. His name was Narrator, king of kings of the 7 realms, and he slept beneath a crown that hung above his bed like a second moon. And in his dream a crow came out of the east, ragged as smoke, and lifted that crown from the air and flew. His court did nothing. His courtiers stood with the faces of statues. And then, out of the west, small against the sun, came a hawk. And the hawk struck the crow apart in a single pass and laid the crown down gently upon the sleeping king's brow. Narrator woke with a cry, his hands at his head. In the morning he called for the 2 men who stood always at the foot of his throne. And beside the throne, Bereavements, the sage, the reader of stars and dice, calm as deep water, loyal past any bribe. He knew the whole of the tale before a word of it was spoken. On his right, the old vizier, Bereavements, calm as deep water, a cup of diviner's dice at his belt. Note the other one, Baktak, never the sword, always the whisper, cowardice and malice sharpened by a clever tongue. Where he could not wound, he would poison. And half a step nearer the royal ear, Baktak, sleek and hungry and patient. "Read it," said the king, "and read it true. My crown was in a stranger's claws." The old vizier cast his dice and did not hurry. "A raider will rise in the east," he said, "and your throne will taste his hand. That is the crow. But in the west, in Mecca of the Arabs, a boy is to be born, to the house of Hashim. That boy is the hawk. He will break the raider and set the crown back upon your head." But Baktak leaned closer and said, "Silk over a blade. Or, being able to take a crown off a crow, he may in time learn how crowns come off altogether. And there, children, in that one moment, you may see the whole tale to come. The wise man who reads the truth, and the small man who poisons it, and the king who believes them both. Go to Mecca, Khwaja," said the king. "Find me this hawk while he is still in the egg. Bind him to me with honours, with gold. Let him be mine before he is anyone's. So the vizier went, and a caravan of imperial splendour camped outside a city of plain stone, and Boy was received by the chief of that city, a white, bearded man, upright, unmoved by all that Persian gold. A drummer walked the streets and cried a decree that every boy born in that season should be brought forward to be named and pensioned as a servant of the king of Iran. And they were brought. First, the grandson of the house was laid before the old vizier, and Boy cast his dice once and stopped, and cast them again, his hands not quite steady, for he had seen what sat upon them, plain as daylight. Kings of the 7 realms will pay this child tribute, he said softly, and here is the hawk himself, Amir Hamza of Mecca, Sahib Kiran, lord of the auspicious conjunction, the champion the stars had promised, fearless by nature, merciful by reflex, and true to his word, though it cost him the world. The world, and Qaf beside it, will bend beneath his hand. And he kissed the infant's brow, and gave him his name. Hamza, this is Muqbil, the faithful, the quiet archer who would stand at Hamza's shoulder to the end. He noticed everything, said little, and never once missed his mark. Then a slave brought his own newborn son, and the vizier named him Muqbil, the faithful. His arrows will not miss, he said, and his heart will not stray. And last of all came a camel driver, carrying a motherless child, the mother lost in the bearing of him that very night. And this is Amar Ayah, prince of tricksters, greedy and shameless to all the world, and truer than iron to Hamza alone. Half of everything that follows will be his doing. Boy fed the infant a fingertip of sweet sherbet, and in the same motion the baby slipped the signet ring clean off the old man's finger. The vizier looked at his bare hand, and then he laughed until his eyes ran. "Mark the hour," he said. "His first theft, and from a vizier of Iran. He will be a torment to kings, and a plague upon the proud. Greedy, shameless, faithless to every man alive, save one. To Hamza he will be truer than iron. His name is Amar. A hero, an archer, and a thief. 3 boys, 1 milk, 1 cradle room. Remember the thief, children. Half of all that follows is his doing. And now the tale must cross the edge of the world. For in that same week, in the realm of Qaf, in a court that made the emperor's palace look like a village of mud, far off, in the realm of Qaf, sat Shahpal, king of the fairies upon the throne of Solomon, stately as the noon sun, and helpless as any father before a daughter's grief. In the garden of Iram, upon the throne of Solomon, a fairy king sat, radiant as noon, Shahpal, lord of the Paris, and the jinn and the devs, and a daughter was born to him, and they named her Asman-Pari, the sky fairy, and his diviner cast her stars, and his joy died in his beard. "She will reign, my king," said the diviner. "Qaf will be hers. But in her 18th year the devs will rise, and this throne will burn, and the one who quenches that fire is not of Qaf. He is a human child, born in Mecca, 6 days old, tonight." The fairy king was silent a long while, and his daughter, Asman-Pari, the sky fairy, the queen of Qaf to come, bound to Hamza by a horoscope written at her birth, she would love him as a storm loves the shore, and hold him by love and by war. And then he said softly, "Bring me the cradle." And so, children, this is the wonder of that night. 4 fairy-born crossed the dark sky between the worlds, and lifted the sleeping child, cradle and all, out of an upper room in Mecca, and bore him over moonlit deserts and over mountains of impossible emerald into the court of Qaf. And the fairy king lifted the human baby and kissed him, and drew the coal of Solomon along his infant eyelids, so that never, as long as he lived, would the unseen be able to hide itself from him? For 7 nights the child was nursed on the milk of Pari and Jinn and Dev and Ghoul, so that fear might be burned out of his heart before he had words to name it. And they set the fairy daughter's cradle beside his, 2 infants, 1 thread of fate binding them. "What 18 years will not, my king," said the diviner, watching the 2 cradles. 18 more will not untie." Then the cradle was carried home, wrought now of emerald and ruby, glowing with stones that shine in the dark, and set softly back into the upper room in Mecca. And the old nurse woke and saw it, and was wise enough to ask no questions. So the emperor set his mark upon the boy, and Qaf set its milk in him, and neither one asked the boy his opinion. He would spend his whole life, children, giving it. Sleep now. The lamp is low, and tomorrow I will tell you how 3 boys of Mecca grew, and how heaven itself came down to hand them their gifts. Let me tell you first of the 2nd head of that one strange animal. For the 3 were like a single creature with 3 heads, strength and aim and thieving, and the strength was Hamza. There was a schoolroom in Mecca, one bright mid-morning, when it came to light that Amar had been running a ring, smuggling sweets past the schoolmaster and selling them to the other boys. The master's turban was found flying from the flagpole, and the master's cane was up in the air, high over Amar's flinching back. And then, of a sudden, it was not. For a boy of 10 was standing in the very arc of that swing. He had not leapt. He was simply there, the way a wall is there. He did not glare. He did not say one word. He only looked up at the master with something far worse than defiance. He looked up with calm, and he held it. 1 beat, 2, 3, and the cane wilted in the master's hand, and the whole class forgot to breathe, and Amar, from the floor, filed that moment away forever. Now understand, children, what that schoolmaster understood, before ever a king did. The boy was not brave. Brave men are men who conquer fear. This one had no fear to conquer. Qaf had drunk it clean out of him in the cradle. What stood before that cane was only this. Everything Hamza loved stood behind him, and that was the one place, all his life, he ever chose to stand, between the harm and his people. So they grew. There was a flight to the slopes of Mount Boy Qubad, where a rain of well-aimed pebbles kept every pursuer comically at bay. There was Mukbil, silent as a shadow, who could knock a date off a wall at 40 paces with a thrown stone, and no man ever saw him take his aim. And there was the day Amar vanished for a whole day, and Hamza turned Mecca upside down until he found him, and then could not decide whether to embrace him or to throttle him. For here is the secret of the boy who feared nothing at all. He had exactly one terror in the world, and it was the losing of his people. And so, to the day, the gifts came down. There was in the town a horse that no man could ride, a monster of a beast, chained and muzzled, its eyes like a court in open mutiny. And a bargain was struck, brokered by Amar, of course. Ride the thing, and it is yours. The horse exploded, and Hamza did not so much break it as outstubborn it, wall to wall across that yard, until the beast stood trembling and beaten, and Hamza, for the first time in all his young life, was utterly spent, and slid down against a rock beyond the edge of the town, worn to nothing. And it was there the unseen came to find him. A veiled horseman led up a black stallion, whose coat drank the very sunlight. A horse from the stables of the prophet Isaac, and they called him Black Constellation. And a hand of light came to rest upon Hamza's shoulder, and the desert was, for a moment, very quiet. Amar, meanwhile, had come chasing after his friend on foot, complaining the whole weary way. and at a well he met a green-robed old man, Khizr, who took one look at him and laughed, and the old man blessed his legs and raced him. And Amar lost the first and lost the second and won the third, because he cheated. And Khizr, delighted, said to him, "The wind itself will envy your feat, and debt collectors will write poems of grief." And Mukbil, poor Mukbil, left behind, and certain now that his two milk brothers had outgrown him at last, was found at the very bottom of his sorrow by a voice like calm, still water. And a bow was set into his hands, and from that hour his arrows would not miss. Now the prophecy that an emperor had dreamed came to pay its first coupon. For out of the east swept the raider, Hisham of Khaybar, the crow of that old dream. And the crown of the emperor was in his fist. It was in his fist for exactly as long as it takes a rider to come out of Mecca. Black constellation at full stretch. Mukbil's arrow taking the raider's standard clean out of the sky. And Hamza and Hisham meeting once, and hard, and the crow breaking, and the crown handed back, gently, exactly as the dream had shown it. And on the long road home the conquered chiefs knelt down and rose up again as companions. Adi-Madi-Karib, the giant, the glutton, the innocent. His appetite was as vast as his arm. His rage arrived whole and left whole, and he wept as hugely as he ate. There was Adi, the giant, an ex-brigand whose appetite became a legend on the spot. "Double his rations," said Hamza. "No, treble them." There was Tauk, who walked with a tiger at his heel. There was Sultan Bakht and Manzar Shah. For mercy, children, was building this army, one spared enemy at a time. And in Mecca, the old chiefs scattered arms along the road, and Hamza knelt and kissed his father's feet, and the whole city roared out a new name for him, not Hamza, Amir Hamza, the commander. Now word of all this reached the emperor, Shavan, and he was genuinely glad, and he dictated a letter of thanks and a robe of honour. But Baktak, that sleek and hungry man, shut out from the good news, laid his hands upon that letter along the road, and swapped it. And the copy that reached Mecca named the heroes as beasts of burden, and gave the emissaries themselves forged and filthy insult names. The letter was read aloud at the feast, and there fell a silence with knives in it, and Hamza's face went very, very still. Mark that stillness, children. In this man it is a worse thing than another man's rage. And then Amar rose, beaming, and clapped his hands for the next course to be brought. And before the emissaries were set heaped platters of grass and bones. "Food," he cried, "fit for the guests as they are named, and for their robes of honour, a pack saddle and a dog's blanket ceremonially draped across their shoulders." Daggers came out. Tauk disarmed both men with a yawn, and the emissaries fled back to the emperor and lied, until the old vizier Buzurjmer quietly produced Mukbil and the true letter and the forged one beside it. And Baktak was fined and banished, the first of very many times, for that man is always, always back. And he grovelled his way out of the hall. And the emperor, watching the proof burn, said softly to himself, "The hawk restored my crown, and I have taught him what my word is worth." So the emperor's true apology came at last, carried by Buzurg Ummid, the old vizier's own son. And that young man, as a professional courtesy, first conned Amar out of every stitch he was wearing, and left him bare as an egg on the open road. And then he dressed him again, piece by piece, in the regalia of the trade, the Ayar's kit of 444 tools, the waxes and the oils of disguise, the ropes, the little vials, and the zambil, the bag that holds more than the whole world. "Rule 1, he said, "whatever an Ayar can lift belongs to him." "And rule 2, asked Amar, You have just failed it, said Buzurg Umid. Never let another ayah teach you rule one. And for Hamza there came a pavilion that had belonged to the prophet Daniel, and a great serpent banner that cried out his war name and breathed perfume when a battle drew near. So the emperor sent a robe, and the vizier's son sent a lesson, and heaven sent a horse. Mir Nigar, princess of Ctesiphon, now Shavan's own daughter, and the one heart Hamza would never turn from. Passionate, unashamed, iron faithful, never a prize to be won, but a will to be reckoned with. And far away, in the emperor's own city, a princess heard the name Hamza spoken for the very first time, and asked twice over how the story of the letter had ended. Sleep now, children. The lamp burns low, and tomorrow I will tell you of that princess, and of the night that a name became a longing. There is the long road which costs you time, and there is the short road which costs you blood. Mark which one the boy chose, and mark too who profited from the lion once the lion was dead. For in that one small difference you will find the whole distance between a hero and an ayah. So it was that Hamza set out at last for the city of the emperor, for Ctesiphon, of the king of kings. And at a crossroads his guide, Buzurg Umid, drew rein and told him the truth of the two ways. The long road was safe, and it cost 6 months. The short road was swift, but it had been shut for 5 years, and the toll-keeper on it was a lion that had eaten the road's very reputation until no caravan would so much as speak its name. Hamza, of course, sent the whole army the long way and took the short road himself, with only Amar for company. And Amar walked at his side and spent the entire journey listing in loving and exhausting detail every single thing that was wrong with this plan. They came to a spring among the reeds. Birds, clear water, sweetness in the air, and the tale holds that stillness one beat too long, so that you already know. The lion came out of the reeds like a hillside coming loose, and I will tell you honestly, Amar was up a tree before the roar had finished, shouting tactical advice down from the branches, for his cowardice was an honest thing, and that is half his charm. But Hamza met the charge head on. He cried out once, and he broke the beast across his knee. It was not quick. It took the hours from dusk into full dark. And when it was done, Amar climbed down and kissed his brother's hands. And then, at once, and very professionally, took out a needle and thread and began to skin it. "You killed it," he said, straw already flying. "Fine! Glory to you, brother. But a dead lion is not a story. A dead lion is inventory." And here, children, is where the trickster made his masterpiece. For the lion reached Ctesiphon before its killers did. At dawn, outside the walls, Amar set his stuffed and stitched creation upon a hillock, jaws stretched wide, glass eyes staring. And the grass-cutters saw it and fled screaming, and the gates slammed, and the markets emptied, and the king of kings of the 7 realms stood on his own balcony and watched his capital laid siege to by a lion made of straw. Until at last Mukbil, who had come in with the main column, walked up the hill, looked the beast calmly in its glass eye, and drew a single thread of straw from between its teeth. The court's terror broke into laughter, and Mukbil was robed and rewarded for it, which stung Amar so deeply that on the road out he put a slingstone clean into his milk brother's forehead over the insult. The quarrel came before Hamza, Amar pleading his wounded etiquette, Mukbil offering gold. And Amar's principles, you will find, dissolved the instant they touched the box of coins. So they were reconciled. Remember it. These brothers bruise one another, and then they close ranks anyway. Whole years to come will run on that engine. Now the court itself. The great divan of Ctesiphon, pillars standing like a forest turned to stone, the throne at the heart of it, and beside the throne one empty chair, the seat of Rustum, that no man had dared claim for generations. And Hamza, 16 years old, the first down of a beard upon his cheek, invited to sit wherever he pleased, walked past every grandee in that hall and sat down in it. And a sound went through the court like ice cracking on a river. A champion named Faulad, son of the general Gustam, rose to challenge the presumption. They wrestled arms before the throne, and Faulad's arm went down like a drawbridge lowering. He snatched a dagger in his fury. A moment later, the dagger was in Hamza's other hand, taken to pieces, and while all eyes were on the strength of the boy, Amar was at his own work. The king's own signet ring simply vanished from the king's own finger. Uproar. A search. And the ring was discovered. Oh, horror, in the robes of Baktak. Banishment for Baktak. The second, and the count goes on. But Hamza, being honourable, confessed the trick and had the man pardoned, and Baktak, ever after, paid Amar 500 tumans, with a note promising 500 more, simply to be seen in his company a little less. Amar framed the note. Then Gustam came home in triumph, with 4,000 champions at his back and a trophy chain behind him. Bahram Gurd, the Emperor of China himself, paraded as a prize of honest war. His welcome embrace with Hamza was a duel dressed as a courtesy. 2 smiles, 4 arms locked, and one general quietly buckling inside his own armour. But that night Hamza went into Gustam's camp and found the truth. Bahram had not been taken in battle at all. He had been drugged and betrayed and shut in a cage shaped like a coffin. Hamza broke the cage open and nursed the man and laid the case before the throne. That deceit dishonours the very crown it claims to serve. And Naushavan, to his credit, and it is nearly the last full credit I shall give him, heard it and confirmed it, and ordered the one remedy this world understands. A fair contest, Hamza against Bahram, once Bahram could stand. 3 hours that match lasted, forehead pressed to forehead like 2 iron beasts, and the whole court forgot how to breathe. And at the end, Hamza lifted the Emperor of China clean over his head and set him down gently, and Bahram Gurd took his hand and chose his side for the rest of his life. But under all these feasts, children, Ctesiphon was a garden with knives buried in it. The noble's resentment had been collecting in Gustam like water in a cellar, and so came the invitation, all humility, all apology, to a private garden hung with lanterns. The wine flowed, and Hamza's watchfulness floated away upon it. And at the blackest hour of the night, 400 blades rose up out of the flower beds, and Bahram Gurd threw his own body across Hamza, and took upon himself the killing stroke meant for his friend, repaying his life within the very week he had been given it. And Mukbil, sober as he always is, mark that, it will matter more than once, stood over them both in the dark, and 100 came at him, and his arrows did not miss. Gustam fled into the night certain he had killed Hamza. He had, in truth, only made him, and when the court physician despaired of Bahram's wound, it was Amar who arrived, all theatre and flourish, and performed the impossible surgery in the field. The vizier's needle stitching exactly where the trickster's hands directed, for the ayar of the age, he will tell you, has more trades than he has enemies. And Bahram lived. So the king, grieving very loudly and innocent, very officially, gave Hamza the garden of justice for his own, and sent a warrant riding out after Gustam into the dark. So the boy came at last to the emperor's city, and in a single season that city handed him both of its gifts, a seat beside the throne, and the knowledge of what truly grows in imperial gardens. Sleep now. The lamp burns low, but remember the sober archer, children, and remember the general who ran, and remember, for tomorrow it will matter above all things, that the princess's window looks straight down upon the garden of justice. And heaven mocks them with the same two little instruments, a ladder and a window. Now hear how the emperor of the world feasted, and how two men came uninvited to his feast, and how the two most dangerous hearts in the empire fell in love while only 3 people watched. For a week, the pleasure gardens of Ctesiphon blazed with lamps. There were musicians and candles of camphor, and the King of Kings himself poured wine for Hamza, with his own royal hand. And because 2 men were forbidden that garden by name, at the gate stood Adi, with a single standing order, no Amar and no Baktak. But you have not forgotten Amar, and Amar does not forget a gate. He came to it with a ruby in his palm, and pressed it into Adi's hand, and by the time Adi looked down, the ruby had turned to a fistful of sand. 3 bounds carried Amar over the wall, and then no uproar at all, only a lute beneath the great chinar tree, and a voice so unfairly beautiful that the whole feast fell silent on its own, the way a room hushes when a candle is carried in. The king sent an usher to fetch the singer, but Amar, all false modesty, only sang the louder of how he preferred his solitude, sang it so the king would have no choice but to come to him. And Nowshavan came, laughing. By dawn, the thief of Mecca was cupbearer and flautist, and the emperor's newest and most delightful toy, with pearls heaped in his lap. For Hamza wins his rooms upon the battlefield, children, but Amar wins his the way water wins, by finding the low way in. And Baktak? Baktak came to the same wall, but where Amar leapt it, Baktak chose the drainage gutter, the filth channel, and stripped himself naked first, if you please, to keep his fine robes dry. Now the gardeners at the outflow had been warned that very evening by a deeply, deeply concerned Amar. So they netted the vizier as he crawled out of the drain, and they beat him magnificently, and they bound him naked in a tree until the morning. And when the king was shown him there at dawn, the great Baktak treed like a cat, his laughter, the tale says, opened like a rose. And then, sweetest of all, Amar rescued him, pleaded his pardon, bought back his stolen clothes for 300 tumans of his own coin, and entered the whole disgraceful affair with the page number into a ledger he carried and announced to the court, his notebook of stupidity, so that now the proudest man in Persia owed his very dignity to the one man on earth he hated most. Mark that debt, children. It does not get paid. It gathers interest. But now the tale grows quiet. Now there is no music. By day the king was showing off his marble, the palace of the 40 pillars, and its cool water channels running through the inner gardens. And Hamza, apart from the others, was bathing at one such channel. And above him, from behind a carved lattice, the Princess Mihnigar saw him. The old poets would say, a love arrow struck her. I will tell you only what there was to see, the pitcher in her hand overflowing, and she not feeling it run down her wrist. Then she unclasped the necklace from her own throat, and she dropped it, deliberate, reckless, royal, so that it fell upon his wet shoulder. He looked up, but the lattice was already empty, only a curtain, still moving. And Hamza came back to the feast that evening carrying a lady's necklace and no explanation whatsoever. Muqbil noticed. Muqbil said nothing. He always notices. That one. He never says. That night Hamza could not sleep, and he walked upon the palace roof. And below him, in her own courtyard, sat Mihnigar among her ladies. with the wine going round. He was about to withdraw, and then he stopped, for the first lady raised her cup and drank to Amar, the trickster, and the second raised hers and drank to Mukbil, the faithful, and around that circle it went. Every last one of his companions had a secret admirer among the princess's women, and Hamza crouched in the dark above them, counting on his fingers, scandalized, mouthing to himself, "How long has all of this been going on?" And last, the princess herself raised her cup and said, "I drink to the slayer of Hisham of Khaybar, the one who set all of yours free." And every cup she lifted after that, for 3 hours until the party slept, was to him, to the Sahib Kiran. So he climbed down, he crept past the sleeping ladies, and he stood over her sleeping face. She who, the tale says so beautifully, in coquettish sleep, yet seems to lie awake. And this hero, this breaker of armies, reached down to steal a single kiss, like a common thief. And being the least practiced sneak in all the world, he slipped. She woke screaming, "Thief! Thief!" The ladies came stampeding, and Hamza, cornered, dripping with everything but dignity, drew himself up and announced, most formally, "Beloved, I am the slayer of Hisham of Khaybar, and I am slain, in my turn, by the charm of Mihr Nigar." And she knew him, and she was mortified, and so she hid him under her own bed, and cried out that she had only had a nightmare, and sent the whole household away. And then, once they were gone, she fainted properly, and was brought back to herself by his breath upon her face. And they spoke until dawn came grey through the lattice, and their parting was made like a treaty, and meant like a vow. "Do not," he said, "let this poor victim of separation slip out of your heart." And she gave him her answer, the couplet that will come back to us, children, before this tale is done. "Go now, and whatever will be, will be. Slowly, slowly, my heart will learn to wait." And the morning after was pure comedy, with a knife hidden in it. For at the king's garden party, Hamza could not sit still. Twice he rose and left the gathering, only to go and stare at the wall of her palace. And each time he cheerfully paid the fine that Baktak's spite had set on his leaving, 100 tumens an exit, like a happy man buying tickets to his own foolishness. And 3 men diagnosed his sickness at once across that garden, Buzurjmer, the vizier, fondly, Amar, delighted, and Baktak, calculating, a single 3-cornered glance that holds the whole rest of this age within it. But the vizier moved first. Baktak had to go, so Amar volunteered to serve the wine himself, and Baktak, who knew better, who said aloud, "Something here is fishy," was shamed before the whole court into drinking the trickster's cup regardless, and the laxative did its slow and patient civic justice. The couch beside the throne was ruined, and Adi dragged the vizier out of the royal presence, by his beard, at the king's own furious command. Exit the villain at his very lowest, which is always, always, the moment before he is at his most dangerous. So the necklace found a neck to hang all its trouble upon. A vizier knew, and smiled. A trickster knew, and drank a toast. And a man with laxative on his breath, and a beard-shaped grievance in his heart knew too, and went home to sharpen it. Sleep now, children. The lamp is low. The price of the princess, when at last they name it, will not be 100 tumens. And tomorrow, I will tell you of a giant from the land of Ceylon, and the first shadow that falls across the king's love for Hamza. He sends you to collect another man's head, and he prays that you both die of the errand. Landhaur bin Sa'dan, Emperor of Hindustan, master of the mace and the war elephant, a mountain that walked. Devotion was his nature. His grief, when it came, would strike him to his knees. The head in question belonged to Landhaur, Emperor of Hindustan, and it was, as heads go, magnificent. A letter of grievance came to the throne at Ctesiphon against Landhaur, the rebel emperor of the East, and Naushavan, half of him weighing his empire and the other half leaning toward the whisper of Baktak, made a proclamation before his whole court. The hand of Mir Nigar, his own daughter, to the man who could subdue the emperor of Hindustan. And Hamza accepted before the echo of it had died in the hall. So the betrothal was sealed with wedding sherbet. But Amar, outrageous and, as ever, entirely correct, objected that a man about to sail across the world and die for a bride ought at least to be permitted to see her first, and the queen, Mir Angez, allowed exactly one look behind the edge of a curtain, and through that curtain rings were exchanged. Keep your eye on that ring, children. Mir Nigar will wear it a long, long way, and in the same breath, as though the world required a jester's mirror for every solemn thing, Amar was promised to a lady named Fitna Bano, and courted her with a gift men still laugh about, 1 date and 2 walnuts, and she kept them. Then the armada sailed out of Basra toward the island of Sarandip, and here the tale unfurls all its sails at once. Amar, who had no love of the sea, tried first to escape the entire ocean by nobly offering to stay behind and pray for the fleet. Hamza, with great ceremony, granted him a small boat instead, and Amar rowed to a little island and stepped ashore upon it, and the island dove, for it was a fish. Fished out, dripping, he announced to all who would hear that the ocean now owed him money. Then came the castaways, with legs like leather straps, pitiable creatures who begged upon the shore to be carried, and then knotted those strap legs around their carriers' throats and would not let go. Terror of the kind that visits sailors in their worst dreams, until Amar tricked his own rider and killed him, and freed the others, and then presented a bill to every man he had saved. And then the sea itself opened, the whirlpool of Alexander, a hurricane, and the ships spiralling down the drain of the world, and at the dead centre of it a black pillar of stone, and upon the pillar a tablet with words cut into it, that only the lord of the auspicious conjunction, or his deputy, might climb this pillar and beat the drum of Alexander. Hamza rose at once to climb it, but Amar, first pausing in the teeth of the storm, to extract signed notes of promise from every officer on the deck, claimed the deputy's right, and leapt. And he missed, and he landed upon the back of a surfacing crocodile, and sprang off its very teeth, and reached the pillar, and beat the drum, and the sound of it was the end of the world. 1,000,000 seabirds burst off that pillar in a single roaring cloud, and the wind of all their wings blew the whole fleet clear of the spiral and out onto open water. The ships made Sarandip, but Amar was left marooned upon the pillar, alone in the middle of the sea, and there he was not abandoned. In a green robe that has no face, a figure of light came to him upon the water, and fed him from a bread that did not end, and a flask that did not empty, and carried him to land by the speaking of a secret name. And another such light gave him 2 gifts he would lean upon for years to come: a net that makes any burden light, and a blanket that makes the man beneath it vanish from all eyes. So Amar walked into the war camp, and found it in the middle of a funeral, his own. They were mourning him, and rather than announce himself like an honest man, he spent 1 perfect night wrapped in his new blanket, unseen, calling himself the Angel of Death, and relieving the grieving nobles of their gold at a whisper, until Hamza knew that whisper for what it was, and threw his arms around a man he could not see, and wept and laughed. Then came the war for a head, and it began, of course, with Amar's mischief. He drugged Landhaur's whole court and stripped it of its jewels in the dark. Hamza, furious, sent every last jewel back with an apology, and Landhaur, Emperor of Hindustan, did not rage. He asked to meet the thief, so Amar came and robbed him a second time, taking the royal robes off the emperor's own back. And Landhaur laughed like thunder in the monsoon, and swore it was the finest entertainment of his entire reign. The two camps feasted together before they ever fought, everyone at the table knowing full well that tomorrow would be spears. Landhaur offered Hamza an alliance against Nashirvan himself, and Hamza refused, for his word was already given to the crown. Then Landhaur offered his own head freely, unresisting, and Hamza refused, that far harder. No, it would be settled the honourable way, and 700,000 men watched them settle it, spears first, and Landhaur let himself be disarmed rather than strike the first blow. Against one, he said, whom my heart already serves. Then the mace, 3 blows that would have split a fortress, and Hamza took them on the armband of Adam and stood. Then the great sword, Samsam, through shield and through war horse both, and then, at the last, they wrestled. 3 days, children, and 3 nights, locked together, neither yielding, sunrise and torchlight, and sunrise again, like 2 storms grinding against each other and refusing to break. And on the 4th day, Hamza lifted the Emperor of Hindustan clean over his head into the sky, and the roar of the crowd fell silent, and Landhaur, hanging upside down against the heavens, began to laugh. "Put me down, Arab," he said. "I am yours." And they feasted and were brothers, and his great war elephant knelt before her master's new brother. So the Amir came home in triumph and walked straight into a trap that had been laid for him across the whole time he was away. Poison, cured in a single beat by one of Amar's amulets. A false report of his own death. A new suitor produced for Nigar, who was standing at her window with a knife in her hand when Amar climbed through it, dressed as an astrologer. "Weep, later," he told her. "He is alive. Also, I shall need to borrow your suitor." And then Baktak's masterstroke, in open court, before the whole assembly. "If Hindustan is truly subdued," he said, silk over a blade, "then let its emperor's head prove it. Or was the great victory of the Sahib Kiran merely a private arrangement between friends?" And Hamza went very still, for he would not break his word to the crown. So he ordered the execution, and dared his own companions to be the ones to carry it out, and not one of them could. Each man stepped up before the kneeling emperor, who knelt serene and said only, "Strike, I die the emperor's servant." And each man lowered the blade and stepped away. And when at last the royal executioner raised his axe, it was caught in the very air by the arrival of the queen's household. Mir Anges, with Mir Nigar at her shoulder, overruled the king of kings before his own throne, took Landhaur under the protection of the women's palace, and walked him out. And Nashirvan watched his own wife undo his vizier's trap, and understood at last whose idea it had been to send for her. His eyes found Hamza's across the hall, and neither of them bowed. So the Amir won a war and refused its trophy, and the court learned the most dangerous thing about him, that he could not be made cruel. A king can bribe the greedy, and a king can frighten the fearful. But a merciful man, with an army of forgiven enemies at his back. For that, children, a king needs a subtler poison. His name was Baktak, and he had a mother. Sleep now. The lamp burns low, and tomorrow I will tell you what an old woman's cunning can do that 10,000 spears could not. You cannot stab a man who breaks maces on his chest. But the heart, children, the heart wears no armband. Baktak had failed with poison, and failed with axes, and failed with the law, beaten in open court, shamed before the throne he had thought to command. He did the thing that every schemer does when his cleverness runs dry. He went home to his mother. For every monster, children, has one. And his mother was a thing called Hell Cave Bano, ancient and sweet-voiced and terrible. She listened to their weeping and their rage, and when they were done she said the quiet words that armies could not say. You cannot kill the man, so kill his joy, announce the wedding, and then let the girl die of it. And so they laid a trap that ran not on grief, but on happiness. The wedding of Hamza and Mihanigar was proclaimed for the week's end. Hamza's camp erupted. There was bunting in the streets of Ctesiphon, and the princess was led smiling down into the bridal apartments below the palace, and the door of that underground suite closed upon her face as the truth came down. 2 days passed, and word crept out. The princess is ill. 4 more, and a second word, colder. The princess is dead. Morning broke over the city like weather. And Hamza, the man who had wrestled Landhaur for 4 days and not fallen, was on the point of his own dagger inside a single minute. It took Landhaur and Bahram both to pin his arms. For here, children, the tale shows you the one wound that Hamza could never guard. His mortal wound, always, was other people. But Amar took his friend's face in both hands, and this time he made no jokes. "Dead men have funerals, brother," he said. "So where is hers? First we bury my suspicion, and then, if I am wrong, I will sharpen the knife for you myself." So Amar went down into the mourning palace, and he watched for the one dry eye in all that grief. And he found it, Hell Cave Bano, whispering in the ear of the unwitting queen. He shadowed her, and in an empty gallery, an old woman came hobbling up to Bano to ask after the poor dead princess. And before Bano's cry could climb out of her throat, the strangler's cord was already out of that old woman's sleeve. For the old woman was Amar. He hid the body in the dry leaves, and then children. Then he became her. Wax and oils, the stoop of her back, the sweetness of her voice. And Hell-carved Bano was led down by a servant girl into the cellar suite, where Mihanigar sat alive among untouched food. Her eyes cried empty. "Princess," said the old woman, and the voice slid, halfway through, into Amar's own. "Your funeral is upstairs, your wedding is postponed, and your bridegroom needs your handwriting before he opens his own ribs. 1 line, something only he would believe." Mihanigar took up the pen, and she did not look up as she wrote. "You strangled the old devil, didn't you?" she said. And Amar answered, "This is why I like you better than him." He would have asked questions. The note reached Hamza's hands, and you could watch the life travel back up his body as he read it. And then came the riposte. Hamza's whole command marched into the court, dressed in mourning black, to demand, with a courtesy that cut like a blade, the immediate funeral of their beloved princess. And the king, cornered by his own lie, had no choice but to produce a bier. So a box left the palace that evening, borne with all the honours of the state, and Amar walked before it, leading the grief, and the plotters buried their own witch beneath a mountain of royal mourning, while Mihanigar walked back into the daylight on the arm of the queen, and Baktak, standing at the graveside, understood exactly what it was that he was burying, and could not say one single word. But a viper does not die because you tread on its tail. 15 days now until the wedding, proclaimed once more, and Baktak, in ashes and ingenious, went out and bought men, men who had already lost their ears and their noses to old punishments. And he taught them their lines, and set them swinging the chain of justice. That was the sacred bell that no king in the world might ignore, and they cried out beneath it, "Hamza's taxmen did this to us. He gathers your tribute from the 7 lands, in his own name." The lie was not aimed at the king, children. It was aimed at Hamza's honour, and it struck square. The Hashemite vein stood out upon his brow, and by the Lord of the Kaaba he swore that he himself would go and gather the tribute of the 7 lands for the crown, and take no bride until the work was done. Nowshavan played at reluctance even as he stamped the mission through, and only Mihr Nigar and you and I could see the whole machine of it, the wedding sabotaged yet again, and this time by nothing but Hamza's own virtue. At the parting, at the curtain, she gave him no tears. 15 days they promised me, she said. I have learned what promises weigh in this place. So go. But Hamza, count what you promise, even to kings, especially to me. And the road to Greece was one long treachery, one for every stage. There was the guide Corin and his poisoned wells. And Hamza would touch no water that his men could not drink, and Amar, by the grace of Khizr, found the true water. There was the bathhouse built to collapse, that collapsed, with a certain poetry, upon its own architect. And there were Corin's rubies, confiscated. And then Corin, subtracted. In Greece proper, the King Farad'n turned to the faith in gratitude before Hamza had lifted a finger. And then he named his 3 torments. There was the serpent that had burned a whole province to ash, and Hamza put an arrow into each of its eyes, and then the sword into its heart, in a blackened land where the ash fell down like snow. There was the killer Moor, dispatched off in the wings by a cheerful, returning Landhaur, who came back with the head tucked under one arm. And there was the third thing, which the old king could not ask standing up, his daughter, Nahid Mariam. Hamza refused. His vow was whole, and he spoke Mihr Nigar's name aloud, and that refusal all but killed the old king with shame. His own brother had to wrestle the knife from his hand, and it was Amar, the pragmatist, who closed the trap that kindness had built. Alliances need blood, he argued, and Greece needs its honour back, and men break such vows every day. Leave the princess to me. So Hamza yielded half. The marriage was made, but he swore he would not touch his bride until Mihr Nigar was his wife. 2 weeks of courteous, careful distance, and as he left one of Corin's rubies upon Nahid's wrist, a decent man's guilt rendered into stone. And there she stood, alone upon the sea terrace, dignified and married and untouched. The saga will pay that debt one day, children, but not tonight. So the second wedding died more quietly than the first. No coffin this time, only a vow with another vow folded up inside it, sailing home the long way round. In Ctesiphon, a princess counted broken promises. In Greece, a bride counted stars. Sleep now. The lamp is low. And in Egypt, children. In Egypt, a pigeon was learning to carry letters. Remember the pigeon, for tomorrow I will tell you what it brought. But his murders travelled by pigeon. And this is the story of the fastest bird in all of Persia, and of the one man alive who ever dared to argue with it. Now the Emir had ridden into Egypt to collect the empire's tribute, and Egypt met him with open gates, feasts, music, garlands in the streets, and wine. But the wine was drugged, and Hamza and faithful Adi and the whole of the advance party woke in chains at the bottom of a dry and ancient well, the pit of Joseph, the old prison of that land where the light of day comes down only as far as a man's memory of it. But the king of Egypt was a coward. He would not kill an emperor's champion without the emperor's word. So he wrote out his request, and he tied it to a pigeon's leg, and he loosed it toward the throne of the world. And in Ctesiphon, at the roost above the palace, that letter fell into the hands of Baktak like rain into a drought. His whole life had waited for this scrap of paper. But even Baktak knew that before the deed was done, the court must be swept clean of anyone who might avenge it. So he laid a feast for Landhaur, the giant of India, and for Bahram, and for Mukbil the faithful. And he had learned this, Baktak, from watching Amar all these years. Do not poison the plan, poison the guests. Mukbil, suspicious over his own cup, rose and staggered for the door and fell before he reached it. Landhaur woke in shackles forged for an elephant, and Buzurjmer, the old vizier, a prisoner now in all but name, watched under lowered lids. And as they carried Mukbil past, he pressed into his hand the antidote and the errand in a single motion. "The pigeon flies at dawn," he whispered, "and Hamza's death rides in its anklet. No horse on earth can outrun it, so fetch me the man who can." Dawn came. On the roost tower, Baktak took the bird in his two hands and lifted it to the sky, and a voice at his very elbow said pleasantly, "I'll be needing that back." Baktak fainted dead away into the arms of his attendants, and Amar ran. Oh, children, this was the race. The pigeon, a grey dash, flung across the roof of the world, and beneath it, Amar, on legs that Khizr himself had blessed long years before, eating the miles as a fire eats dry grass. And ahead of them both, Mukbil, sent on a swift camel, 140 miles gone before the camel dropped dead of the poisoned grass along the road, and Mukbil walking on, his feet bleeding, until he, too, fell beneath a lonely tree. And Amar reached him there, and there was no time for weeping. "Get up," he said. "Get on my back. You're the arrow now." And so they became one creature. Mukbil riding upon Amar's shoulders, his bow drawn out over Amar's head, the two of them a single centaur of vengeance closing on the skyline of Egypt. The pigeon dipped toward the fortress gates, and Mukbil's arrow took it out of the empty air and dropped it into the moat below. Amar waded in and fished out the bird, and the letter both. He read the death warrant through once. Then he folded it away into his zambil, his bottomless bag, for that paper was evidence now, and Amar never threw evidence away. And then, with great ceremony, he plucked the pigeon and cooked it, and made a fine kabob of it, and fed every bite to the exhausted Mukbil. "State secrets, brother," he said, "best swallowed." Now Egypt still held Hamza in the pit, so Amar went into that city by night, wearing 3 disguises one over another, a traveller, then a merchant, then a ragged beggar. And at each turn he shed a skin and left his pursuers grasping at the last one, and allies gathered around that beggar like iron filings to a lodestone, an old seller of kebabs, Mukbil himself, and most precious of all, Zura, the king of Egypt's own daughter, who knew the way to the pit, and who despised what her father had become. And at the well's mouth, a guard who had turned in the night, his heart changed by a dream, cleared the sentries away. Down the lasso into the dark went Amar, and even there, at the bottom of the world, he could not resist one last trick, announcing himself to the prisoners as the royal executioner, come down especially and only for Adi. And Adi's outraged howling echoing up the shaft was the very thing that told Hamza, laughing in his chains, exactly who had come for them. "God is great!" cried the Amir, and the shackles tore from him like cobwebs. For what the blessing of Adam has freed, no pit can hold. Up into the night air they climbed. The Emir loose, the king of Egypt dragged squealing from his hiding place, his throne forfeit, and his daughter, Zura, honoured and promised in marriage to Muqbil. For the arrow that had saved them all had earned itself a princess. But the warrant, with the emperor's own seal upon it, had gone north in Amar's bag, and when it fell upon the court of Ctesiphon, it landed like a dropped mirror. The emperor blustered. Buzurg-Mehr said nothing, and said it very loudly. And in the women's palace of Persia, Mihr-Nigar stopped waiting, for she had waited long enough. And with her household, by the arranging of Amar, and under her mother's carefully turned away eyes, the princess of Persia walked out of her father's house on her own 2 feet, not stolen, not carried, but choosing. Veil up, eyes forward, and into the camp of Hamza. "You keep collecting my father's debts," she said to him at the edge of the camp. "I have come to stop being one of them." And now the empire could answer only with war, and with no more masks. So the court sent its handsomest sword, Jopin Kaus, and in single combat, Hamza unhorsed him in 4 strokes, and Jopin knelt and swore himself a convert, and was believed and was trusted and was set free. For that was Hamza's pattern, children, to spare the beaten man. Remember that pattern, for this is the night it was betrayed. By midnight, Jopin's 70,000 fell upon the sleeping camp. Seth of Yemen and his 4,000 bought the tents their few minutes with their lives. And Hamza, no armour upon him, riding his black horse bareback, carved the darkness open. But in the press a sword found his head, and the blood ran down into his eyes. And the last that his men saw of him was the great black horse, black constellation, bearing its slumping rider away, away, past the ring of torchlight, into the dark beyond. By dawn, 60,000 of the enemy lay dead, and the field was searched corpse by corpse, and there was no emir among them, and grief spread out in rings through the camp, to Mecca, where Abdul Muttalib bowed beneath it, to Adi, weeping over the report, to Mihr-Nigar, with the ring upon her finger and no hand left to send it to. Only Amar would put on no mourning clothes, and he held to one thread of reason. "The black horse hasn't come home," he said. "A horse with an empty saddle comes home, so he is alive somewhere. Muqbil, hold the fort, guard her, and I will go and argue with the whole wide world until it gives him back." So they searched the earth for him, children, and that was their error, for the earth had never owned him. 2 realms had laid a claim upon Hamza since his 7th night in the cradle, and now the other one, the hidden one, had come to call in its loan. Sleep now, the lamp burns low, and tomorrow I will tell you where the black horse carried him, and what was waiting in the mountains that no map has ever named. Debts, children, are patient animals. They wait a long time in the dark, and they wait without hunger. And then, one morning, they come and sit at the foot of your bed. The coal that was drawn along Hamza's eyes when he was 6 nights old. The milk of devs that was fed to him before he had words. That fearless heart of his, none of it, children, had ever been a gift. Qaf does not give. Qaf invests. And now, after 18 years, the bill had come due. Hamza woke in a cave that smelled of paradise. His head had been split by Jopin's blow, you remember, and the wound was closed now, beneath a sheen of resin, healed by an ointment older than any kingdom, though the scar would stay with him to the end of his days. Around him hung fruit he had never seen on any tree of the world, and beside him sat a grave and courteous stranger who inclined his head and named himself Abdur Rahman, the jinn, vizier of Qaf. He told Hamza the truth, and he told it plainly. The cradle stolen into the sky. The coal, the milk of Pari and Jinn and Dev and Ghoul, all of it the 18-year investment of a fairy king named Shahpal. And now the account had come to be settled. For a rebellion of Devs had risen in Qaf and eaten that whole shining realm down to the walls of one last garden. And the stars said that only one man alive could quench that fire, the Sahib Kiran, the lord of the auspicious conjunction, Hamza himself. And below the mountain there came a sound Hamza knew better than his own name. Black Constellation, his own horse, riderless, had done the one thing that faithful beast had sworn he would never do at a time like this. He had not come to mourn, he had come to lead. And up the goat paths of the mountain the horse brought Amar to the mouth of the cave. There was a reunion, children, and there was a small comedy in it, for the invisible hands of the jinns ruffled the hair of the outraged thief and pinched him, and he could not see a single one of them. They could see Amar. Amar could not see them. But Hamza, whose eyes had been touched by the coal of Solomon, saw every last one, plain as you see me. And Amar argued, because Amar had to argue, Mihr Nigar, waiting, the army, leaderless, Naushavan, circling like a vulture over Mecca. And letters came, one from Hamza's father, one from his beloved, and both of them said the same word, and the word was, don't. But Hamza answered them both with a number that would haunt the whole of the tale to come. Qaf owes me a childhood, he said, and I owe it a war. 18 days, Amar. Their vizier swears the road runs faster on that side of the world. Deliver my letters. 18 days, and I am home. And Amar, who trusted the promises of Qaf the way a man trusts open water, took the 2 letters and said nothing. And quietly, children, he slipped them both into the zambil, that bottomless bag of his, and did not deliver them. He could not bring himself to carry a goodbye he did not believe. Remember that. Remember the letters in the bag. Now the emperor had learned that his hawk lay wounded and alone, and he thought, here is my hour. And he sent Gustam of the Garden of Knives of the poison years ago, the oldest unpaid account in the whole saga, sent him with an army to take Hamza at his very weakest. That army rode straight into Hamza's new and unseen allies. And here, children, was a battle the like of which those Persian soldiers had no word for. Horsemen were plucked screaming into the empty sky by nothing at all. Whole ranks were folded shut like paper by wings no man could see, and the few who lived to flee came back to Ctesiphon, babbling of a sorcery they could not name. Gustam alone cut his way through to Hamza, and Hamza, with one clean stroke, closed that old ledger forever. The Garden of Knives was paid. The poison was paid. Gustam ended there in the daylight, before witnesses. Then Hamza mounted, not his own horse, for Black Constellation would stay behind with the Earth Camp, and the parting between the man and the beast was played without a single word, forehead pressed to forehead. And he stepped with the Jinn vizier through a fold in the very air, and was gone out of the world. And O children, the world he stepped into, the Garden of Iram, velvet canopies, 4,444 jewelled seats, and upon the throne of Solomon, a king worn thin at the end of his strength, Shahpal, his majesty rubbed down to the gilding. With his own royal hand, the fairy king poured white wine of Iram into a cup and gave it to the human champion, and a rose-coloured light moved in Hamza's eyes. And behind a screen of jewelled fretwork, introduced exactly, children, exactly as Mir Nigar had first been shown to us, watching him before he could watch her, sat the king's daughter, Asman Pari, the sky fairy. She looked at him once, only once, and the lattice of that screen fell across her face like the very lattice of fate. She said not one word. The look was enough, and so, quietly, without a drum or a trumpet to mark it, the longest war of the whole saga began. The one fought not over a throne, but over a heart. The terms were laid out by the jinn vizier with a lawyer's dread. 9 days. A feast, then a war, then a farewell feast. And let the 10th day not find you here. Mark those words, children. Keep them by you. And in return, Shahpal swore his own lifelong service. And Hamza rose and vowed to shear every high-headed dev in Qaf down to the ground. Then the armoury of Solomon was opened, and 4 great swords were carried out on silk. Samsam, Kamkam, Scorpion, and Spine-Cleaver. Hamza's hand passed over the famous names, passed them all by, and closed upon the Scorpion of Solomon. And the fairy folk erupted, for that was the sword of the prophecy, the Dev-slayer foretold. They brought a poplar tree to test it, and Hamza cut. And the cut was so clean, children, that the tree did not know it was dead until a hand pushed it, and it toppled slowly into the grass. And the war drums of Iram began, gold and silver kettle drums thundering, and far off past the horizon came the Dev's answer. Mountains slapped like drums by palms of stone. Meanwhile, on the earth, the other clock had started to tick. Amar went to Ctesiphon, dressed as a grain merchant, and bought 1 private hour with the wise vizier, Buzurj Mer, and walked out of that hour with an arithmetic that broke the whole tale in half. Not 18 days, king of thieves, the old man told him. 18 years. That is the first thing. And the second, Velam and Kelam are already riding for Mecca, 30,000 strong, to burn the nest and carry off the phoenix's bride. And in Mecca, the letter of counsel was placed in Miher Nigar's hands, and her whole world folded shut at that one word, years. And she reached for the bowl of poison. And this once, children, she was stopped. Not by any trick of the thief, but by Amar kneeling before her, for the first and very nearly the last time in the whole saga, entirely and painfully honest. Poison is a door out, princess, he said. I am begging you to hold a door open. 18 years, 1 fort, 1 thief upon the walls, and on the last morning of it I will hand him back to you laughing. It is the only oath I have never once planned to break. The army was given free leave to go. Every last man stayed. The fort of Mecca closed its gates, and Amar took his seat under the canopy on the wall, regal as any king of the 7 realms, while out on the skyline the dust of Velam and Kelam began to rise. So both worlds got their war, his against giants he had been built to break, and hers against time, which breaks everyone. 18 years, children. Be grateful the Dastan will keep them far shorter than the lovers found them. You have only to listen. Sleep now. The lamp is low. And tomorrow, I will tell you of the dawn over Qaf, and of the first battle against the Devs, and of the moment the Sky Fairy, behind the screen, at last opens her mouth to speak. Understand the size of things, children, before I tell you what happened at dawn in the Garden of Iram. A Dev's thumb is a minaret. A Dev's laughter, when it comes, flattens orchards. And courage. Courage has no size at all. That is the joke that God built into the world, and on that morning the realm of Qaf was about to hear it told. For out of the pre-dawn dark the army of nightmares assembled. They came dressed in tiger skin and serpent skin and elephant hide, with bands of iron on limbs, like the legs of siege towers. And they danced, they turned somersaults, they clutched their own beards, they spun upon their tails in a grotesque and thundering carnival, a whole horde of monsters capering in the half-light to unman whoever dared to face them. And across the field, In ranks of gold and silver stood the fairy host, their kettle drums ready. And on the reviewing height stood 2 thrones. One was the throne of Shahpal, king of the Paris, and the other set exactly level with it, so that no eye could mistake the honour. The other was the seat of the human champion, the lord of the auspicious conjunction, the man they had begun in that far realm to call Amir Hamza. And Hamza looked out at the somersaulting apocalypse, and he laughed, openly, helplessly, a human the size of their thumbnail, laughing at devs. This, children, was the milk of Qaf coming home to him, the fear that had been burned out of his heart in his cradle, before he had words to name it. And the fairies along the line heard the human laughing at the monsters, and shot by shot the spine of that whole army straightened. Then the horde parted, and their patriarch came forward, Ahriman, the father of Ifrit himself, 500 yards of him. He walked with a full-grown cypress tree for a staff, and when he spoke, his voice was a rock slide that had somehow learned grammar. "They are calling you the Earthquake of Qaf, morsel," he said, looking down from the sky at the tiny figure below. "Earthquakes I have slept through. Now mark this, children, for it is the whole of the man." Even here, even at the foot of that mountain of a creature, Hamza turned first to his king and asked leave to go out. His courtesies never lapsed. Not in the presence of emperors, not in the presence of monsters. The permission was asked, and it was given. And the Amir walked out alone into the field, one small figure crossing a plane of shadow, and he did not look small in his own eyes for a single step of it. "You misheard me, grandfather," he called up, and he drew his blade, the scorpion of Solomon, a sword he had lifted from the wall of the old king's hall, and it sang as it came free. "I am the angel of death. The earthquake is only my footstep." Then he cried out the war cry, "God is great," and it broke across the field like a thunderclap. And he struck one stroke, and the great blade passed through that mountain of a neck, the way, in a smaller season, it had passed clean through a poplar tree. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then, slowly, slow as an avalanche deciding to fall, the head of Ahriman slid from his shoulders, and the whole vast body of him came down. And the fall of him was not a death, children. It was a landscape event, a wall of dust, birds exploding off 3 horizons at once, and the fairy drums going utterly mad. Ifrit sent out the next champion. The scorpion answered. He sent another. The scorpion answered again. 9 dev chiefs came out to challenge the human, and each entrance was grander than the last, and each ending came quicker, until the 9th of them could barely finish speaking his challenge before the blade had finished its reply. And by the 9th, I am told, that last dev could see the pattern of it plainly and hesitated on the field. As well he might. Then a silence fell over the whole plain, and under that silence Ifrit himself came walking out. Vast he was, and black-bristled and terrible. But he came under the quiet of a truce, and he did not come to fight. He bent, and he lifted the enormous body of his father across his shoulders, and he carried him from the field. And as he went, he beat a slung drum in a slow, broken rhythm, the funeral wail of the devs. And the whole monstrous horde drew back behind that drumbeat and left the field to the human. And Hamza watched him go, and there was no triumph in his face, for he too had a father. Remember that, children, when the tale turns dark and the monsters seem only monsters. On that field, the monsters mourned. That night, Iram blazed with celebration. The chiefs of Qaf came with tribute. The wine of Iram flowed. The fairies made music that fell like weather made of glass. and Shahpal restored to his throne, radiant again, and now, for the first time, quietly, afraid of losing his miracle, began, very delicately, with his vizier, Abdur Rahman, walking diplomatic escort at his elbow. 9 days, we said, the king murmured. The 9th is spent, and Ifrit still breathes, holed up in his mother's sorceries. A war half won, son of Abdul Muttalib, is a wound half closed. And Hamza answered him, pleasant and utterly immovable. Then let us finish the war, King of Kings, and then the road home. For every single day I spend here is as 18 days to me. And across the length of that feasting hall, unveiled now among her ladies, sat the king's daughter, Asman Pari, the sky fairy, grown to her 18th year, and she was watching the human champion with a directness that no princess of the world below had ever been permitted. And she spoke to her father, but she aimed it the whole length of the hall. Why does the champion of Qaf keep speaking of roads, father? She said. Build him reasons to stay instead. We are not a poor kingdom. And Hamza met her look, and courteous and catastrophic, he smiled back at her, the way a man smiles at a princess across a feast, meaning nothing by it at all. He had no idea, children, and she now had all the idea there was. And so the first stone of a great tragedy was laid in full and open light. And far below all of this, on the other side of the very sky, the drums of Iram became other drums, war drums, beneath the walls of the fort of Mecca. 30,000 torches in the dark, and up on the wall the faithful archer Muqbil was stringing his bow, and the war horse was stamping in the yard, and under a canopy, cross-legged and entirely unbothered, flying his master's serpent banner over his own head, sat the thief, Amar, already counting 30,000 enemies, the way another man counts coins into a purse. 18 years, brother, he said to Muqbil, surveying that ocean of torches. And then, after a moment, we're going to need a bigger notebook. So Qaf learned his war name, and the king learned his price, and the princess learned his smile, and mistook it, as princesses will, for a promise. 9 days, the vizier had said. Sleep now, children, and count with me in your dreams how long the 10th day is going to last. For tomorrow I will tell you what the fairy king built to keep his champion, and what a mother's grief can raise up out of the dark of Qaf. Everyone children, except the one man who spent 18 years proving it a lie. So keep count tonight. 1 thief, 4 armies. I have waited all my life to tell you this part, for you must know that the empire, unable to reach Hamza, reached instead for the woman he loved. Behind the walls of a fort there lived Mir Nigar, and around that fort the empire threw everything it had. First came 30,000 men under 2 commanders, and they broke upon the stone like water upon a rock. Muqbil stood in the towers, and his arrows did not miss, and behind him stood 40,000 men, whose arrows, now and then, did. And Adi came down out of the gate like a landslide with a beard on it. So the great assault failed and settled into a siege, and the siege settled into a blockade. The long, grinding, patient kind, the kind that does not end. And that, children, is the war you must picture for years to come. Not a battle, a weather. And when armies could not open the gate, the court sent a knife. His name was Khwaja Nihal, and he was an assassin, and he rode in quietly among the honoured reinforcements. But Amar was already there. Amar was a washerman that morning, and heard the whole plot in the steam. And an hour later, Amar was a groom, wringing his hands in the assassin's own tent, weeping that Hamza would never return, and offering, for a price, to hand Mihanigar over himself. And Nihal's greed swallowed that hook down to the feathers. So Amar fed the whole tent the sweet dates of Mecca, every one of them poisoned, and every man in it slept and did not wake. He robbed the tent bare. He took the king's own letter from the dead man's breast, and then, I will not dress this in laughter, children, for it wore none, by lantern light, with a spade, Amar buried the sleeping assassin alive in the cold ground. Remember that. When the clown is alone, in the dark years, with everything resting on him, the clown is capable. That is what guarding her cost. But the very next caper he ran bright as noon. For the great champion, Akzar laid siege to the fort, and Amar's answer was a thing of beautiful disproportion. He stole the enemy's own figurehead. He hooked the crown prince Hermuz clean out of his camp, and drew him from the magic sack, and revived him with a splash of hot vinegar. And he made the prince 3 offers, each smaller than the last. Change your faith, refused. Broker, a peace, refused. Then simply swear you will not attack us. And that, with great relief, the prince accepted. And so the crown prince of Persia became the fort's insurance, kept in perfect honour, and walked home with courtesies. And behind him a cleverer man than his father dragged the whole army back out of bowshot to keep the prince safe. Bakhtiarak, son of Bakhtak, sharper than his father ever was. Mark him well, children. He is the mind the thief will wrestle for the rest of these earthly years. But Akzar would not stay retreated, so Amar walked into the champion's camp as a common foot soldier, and puffed a sleeping dust into his tent. And the dawn found Akzar elephant ears trussed up on public display, wearing, pinned to his chest, a written review of his own performance. And the whole camp laughed. And the giant, who could survive any sword, could not survive being laughed at. And he fell upon his own blade, and the men on the walls read the lesson aloud to one another. That mockery, too, is a siege engine. Now I must tell you of a thing I cannot explain, and I will not pretend to. The court sent next a vast, drunken, boasting champion, Kareen Elephant Neck, who beat his war drums all night against the fort's own great drum of Alexander, brass answering brass in the dark until no man could sleep. And at dawn he stormed all 4 gates at once, and the fort bent, and a gate splintered. And for once in his life Amar was out of tricks, and out in the open, with nothing left. And then down the wind came a rider, veiled in orange, with a sword like a line of dawn. And that rider cut Karen from his saddle, and chased 2 princes 24 miles, who sent home to their father a message that read only, "A great disaster, its nature unknown," and circled the fort once, and was gone. No word, no face. And Amar, alone on the field, caked in dust, turned a full circle and shouted at the empty horizon, "I had a plan, whoever you are." And then, quieter, to himself, taking out his notebook. Note for the record. Orange. Rides like the wind's rich cousin. Smells faintly of oranges. And he wrote a last line and closed the book. Owes me 1 rescue's worth of professional embarrassment. Who was it, children? I will not tell you tonight, nor the next night. That knot stays tied a long while yet. Then the food ran out. The granary echoed, and Adi came to the thief's canopy, trailing the entire garrison behind him as witnesses. For if I come alone, he said, you'll say I ate the shortage myself. And over 2 nights, Amar answered hunger with paper, for he moved them all. The whole army, the princess, her household, ghosted across country in the dark to a new fort called Wolfland. And on the old walls he left soldiers made of paper on strings, and banners nailed in place, and drums worked by clockwork ropes. And the enemy besieged that garrison of paper for days. Bakhtiarak watched a single sentry through his spyglass from noon until noon, and never saw it blink, and lowered the glass at last and said, faint with disbelief, "We are besieging stationery." And for the groceries,
Amar walked weeping into the enemy's camp, all in mourning white, and sold them the very rumour they longed to hear, that Hamza lay dead in Qaf, slain by a demon. And he offered to surrender the princess, and took a sealed letter of safe conduct for it, and brought 400 grieving officers to the reconciliation feast, where Adi ate the enemy's provisions down to the walls, saying, "A beggar's blessing on you, my lord, I am never full," and the fort's carts rolled home by moonlight, groaning with the enemy's own grain. And at every step a clever man begged his commander not to believe it, and at every step the commander, magnificently, did not listen.
And when the last great army came out of Kabul, with odds gone past all sense, Amar stood on the wall and studied the jungle beside the enemy camp, and asked but one question: "What lives in it?" And at midnight the answer arrived in their camp, ahead of a wall of fire. Everything. Lions, wolves, boar, serpents, the whole hungry census of the wild, driven in by trackers who held every way out but one, and into that howling dark rode Adi, wearing the colours and the war cry of Landhaur, so that the terror ran through the camp that the Emperor of Hindustan himself had returned. And by dawn that grand coalition was nothing but smoke and hoofprints and pawprints, and on the wall, under the canopy, Amar read his ledger aloud for the garrison's heart and for ours. Year 3 of 18. Armies defeated, 4. Princes inconvenienced, 2. Champions retired, 3. Won by review. Rescues by persons unknown wearing orange, 1. And he snapped the book shut. Princess, still here. Fort, still ours. Faith. And he looked at the horizon a long moment. Still stubborn. 15 years to go, children. I will not tell you all of them. The nights blur, the armies repeat, and grief, like a drum, keeps its rhythm best when you stop counting the beats. But mark what the thief had built in those dark years. A wall of laughter around one faithful heart. And mark this too, that in Qaf, that very same night, they were pouring the wedding wine. Sorcerers build them the way an honest man builds a house. Walls of seeming, doors made of your own desire, and in the deepest room, the one true thing, the whole lie, was raised to hide. You cannot besiege such a place. You can only believe your way through it, carefully, one step and then another. So watch tonight what the champion trusts. That is the whole lesson. Now. In the garden of Iram, Hamza had grown sick for the sight of home. So he said, "Sound them. If Ifrit will not come to the war, let the war go to Ifrit." And the drum set of Solomon was struck. Gold thunder and silver thunder heard 3 days' journey in every direction. And in his morning camp, the great Dev Ifrit heard it for what it was, his own name, called by something patient. And he was afraid. So he sent for his mother. Now mark her well, children, for she was the first true sorcerer of this whole tale. Maluna the witch, small beside her giant son, terrible beside every other living thing, a grandmother if grandmothers were made of weather. And her counsel was this: do not fight the human. Run into my tilism, into the city of gold, and let him grow old and grey standing at its door. And mother and son were gone out of the world. And Ifrit's leaderless army went over to Shahpal by the 10,000. So the war ended without a war. And the real war of Qaf, the story showed at last, was never the one fought with armies. But the fairy king's gratitude carried a cruel clause, for he could not let Hamza go home, while Ifrit still drew breath beyond the edge of the world. And Hamza heard the road home stretch longer yet again. And he did not weep, and he did not argue. He said only that he would walk into the spell, alone. The crystal fort pointed the way, and on the road a courteous fairy bowed low and put into his hands an emerald tablet, graven with the names of God, the honest guidebook to a dishonest place. Remember this above all, children. Everything within these walls may lie to you, but the tablet never does. And he came to the gate of the city of gold, and the gate was a serpent, vast as a mountain ridge, one jaw upon the earth, one upon the lintel of the sky, its open mouth the door, and it beckoned him in. Breathe the name, said the tablet, and jump. So he looked once at the sky, drew one breath, and walked into the throat of the thing. A cataclysm of sound, then silence, then a garden that would have shamed paradise. And so he learned the first grammar of the tileism. Every threshold is a death you agree to. Then began the gauntlet, each trial a lesson. First, a girl in iron chains, weeping. Sosan Pari, who told a piteous tale of a forced marriage to Ifrit and a betrayal by Maluna. And Hamza freed her, for mercy was his reflex, and she led him toward Ifrit's house. Then rose singing into the air, and her song woke 1,200 guardian devs. And worse, every drop of his blood that fell stood up as another dev. You see the cunning of the place, children. The tileism does not fight you. It makes your own kindness and your own wounds fight you. But the tablet gave its cold instruction. The name upon an arrowhead. He loosed one arrow, and Sosan burst apart like a snuffed lamp, and the whole tide of monsters dropped dead in the middle of their leap. Second, he found true prisoners, a green-robed old king, Junaid Shah, and his daughter, Raihan Pari, mark her, children, quiet and watchful, the one soul in that whole spell who was not performing for him. Chained among 400 devs they lay, and Hamza, once burned, stood over them with his sword ready. And checked the tablet first, and the tablet said, "These are real." So he freed them. And the girl's look at him lasted one beat longer than mere thanks required. She owed him her life before ever she asked his name. Third, a mansion floored with crystal that seemed clear water, an open chest at its heart. And curiosity is a door too. Before he could blink, the dev inside was about his neck like a hangman's rope. But a single hair upon its breast was bound to a second tablet. He pulled it, read the great name, and the whole mansion burned to a barren plain, where a great wheel turned a river of blood into a well, unexplained. Fourth, a silent boy at the last gate. Hamza struck his head from his shoulders, and the head climbed back on, and the boy's face never once changed. The tablet, sharply now, "You cannot kill him. Stop trying." So he breathed the name onto an arrow instead, and sent it into the boy's breast. A black whirlwind and thunder, and the gate stood open on a field of poppies and marigolds. And fifth, and last, a smiling girl who ran to him with a cup of welcome wine, the sweetest trap of all, for who suspects a gift? But he recited the name over the cup, and poured the wine upon her, and she took fire and melted where she stood. The singing stopped, and the garden, caught in its lie, dropped its lovely mask and screamed, "The breaker of the tileism has slain Asra the magician." 5 trials. Children. The freed thing that betrays, the freed things that are true, the trap baited with your own curiosity, the thing you cannot kill by killing, the gift you must never drink. The whole art of a tileism lives in those 5. And beyond the last garden rose a mountain, taller than the pillarless mountain, and from a cave in its side came a snoring like drums beating under the earth. Within, lit by the moon, lay Ifrit asleep, vast as a whole landscape. And here is the beat that tells you who Hamza was. He did not cut the sleeping giant's throat. He pricked the sole of its foot. The great dev swatted at what it took for mosquitoes, bound the enormous arms, and only then woke it, face to face. Up, son of Ahriman. The angel of death does not collect the sleeping. The millstone-studded staff came down, the scorpion sword halved it, and the counterstroke took Ifrit across the waist, clean through but for one tendon. And Ifrit, halved and beaten, asked of his enemy one last favour, that he end it. And Hamza cut the tendon, mercy again, children, in its strangest costume. And then the two halves flew apart into the sky and rained back down as 1,000 Ifrits. The dead dev multiplied into a horizon of himself. Hamza stood surrounded by his own victory gone wrong and called upon God. And a figure of green robe and green light was simply there beside him and said softly, "It is only the Tilism's last lie. That one, the 7th, with the crooked shadow, the name upon your arrow." And Hamza loosed one arrow, and the whole sky of monsters popped like a sky of soap, and only the true Ifrit remained, halved and headless. For his mother had the head. And in the cave, Maluna stood over her dead son's head, her curses boiling. And the green light spoke, the great name, but once, almost gently, and she was gone the way a candle is gone. And there lies the whole arithmetic of the ending. Hamza's sword ends monsters, but only holiness outranks magic. He took the spoils, Ifrit's helmet of gold, the night glowing pearl, and a parting gift besides, a small bread bun and a flask that would never empty, and folded inside them a prophecy. "When these vanish," said the light, "your road turns home. Remember that, children. When the bread runs out, the road runs on." So Iram erupted in joy, and Shahpal wept upon the champion's hands, and all the gold of the false city poured into the true treasury of Qaf. And the city of gold fell, in the end, to the one coin it could not counterfeit, a man who kept his word inside a lie. And Hamza asked, as after every labour, Now may I go home? Sleep now. The lamp burns low. For in Qaf, children, there is always one more thing. And this time, the one more thing wore a wedding veil. And when at last the dividend came due, it was not gold that the fairy realm asked for. It was the investment itself. Forever. For the war was won. The devs were broken. The throne of Shahpal stood unburnt, and all the crowned heads of Qaf came in their tribute ranks to lay their gratitude at the feet of the one human who had saved them. And their gratitude closed over Amir Hamza, the way a ring setting closes over a stone, slowly, and from every side, and without one edge ever looking like a wall. It began with a perfume orange. The old vizier, Abdur Rahman, came before Hamza, bearing it upon a cloth of silk. For that, in Qaf, is how a king offers a royal daughter in marriage. And Hamza, courteous and cornered, tried to set it aside. He spoke of his vow. He spoke of Mihunigar, waiting for him in the world he had left. He spoke of the road home. And the vizier, kindly, learnedly, in the gentlest voice you ever heard, gave him the reasoning that this whole tale has never quite forgiven him for. "A vow sworn in the realm of the world," he said, "binds in the realm of the world. Qaf keeps its own ledgers, Sahib Kiran. Wed here, and your earthly word stays whole. The king's honour is saved, and the road home opens all the sooner. And you must understand, children, no one lied to him. Qaf never lies. It simply measures with its own ruler." Hamza stood there doing the terrible arithmetic of it. To refuse was to insult the very king who owned the only road home. To accept was to break no oath at all, and every meaning of one. And so he accepted. They made the wedding a marvel. And in the middle of the vows the gates burst, and a white dev with 400 raiders came howling for the emir's head, sent by a lord named Samandun, in vengeance for a demon Hamza had slain. Mark that name, children. Samandun. The tale will want it again. And Hamza, in his wedding clothes, without heat, almost politely, excused himself, went out, killed the champion with a single dagger stroke, and came back to the dais scarcely creased. The awe of Qaf deepened, and so did the lock upon the cage. The marriage was made, and on the face of his bride Asman Pari, as she took her vows, there was nothing but joy, pure, entire, undivided joy. Do not doubt that she loved him. Everything that is to come depends upon your not doubting it. A daughter was born to them. They named her Quraisha, and Hamza, I will not hide it from you, was cast down at that cradle, for he had wanted his line to run home to Mecca. But the first time that infant closed her fist around his war-scarred finger and would not let go, he was a father, in spite of himself, and lost. And then began the errands. Always one more thing. A pair of rebel devs, Karkhal and Karpal, put down in an afternoon. A tributary province in revolt, a champion to be answered. And every single task was bought with the very same coin. And then Sahib Kiran, then the road home. And beside his armour on the table lay the bread bun and the flask that the green traveller Kiza had given him long ago, against the day of his greatest need. And with each passing year, children, that bread and that water grew thinner, more faint, more nearly gone. The years did not pass in his face, they passed in the props, and he dreamed of Mia Nigar, grey now and wasted, waiting at a window he knew, grown old with waiting. And he woke from that dream weeping, and weeping he woke his wife. Who is she? Said Asman Pari into the dark. And when he did not answer, is she more beautiful than I am? And grief made him cruel. I will keep the cruelty. It is his, and it is hers, and neither of them is spared it. Her maids, he said, are more beautiful than you. And the whole marriage detonated in a single breath. She threw her lineage against his. He threw his against hers. And, children, this is the most shocking thing in the whole long tale, and I will not soften it. A husband and a wife drew steel on one another. Actual blades, both of them. And the fairy ladies of the court threw themselves between and dragged them apart by main force. And then the two stood there, staring, appalled at what they had become. Shahpal himself came to judge it. He scolded his daughter. He granted Hamza his leave to go. He assigned 4 devs and a throne litter, and this is Qaf to the last inch. He demanded a written receipt of safe delivery, and at the leave-taking, Asman Pari played the last honest card she had. She put the child Quraisha into her husband's arms, and Hamza kissed his daughter and gave her gently back and boarded the litter and went anyway. And you could watch, in that moment, her love finish turning into something colder, if honesty will not keep him. And so the skies themselves were poisoned against him. For she bribed a fairy named Salasil. Yes, children, the very one who had once given Hamza a saving tablet. In Qaf, even the kindnesses have owners, and the 4 devs set his litter down in a white-hot waste to hunt, and never came back. Days went by. Thirst went by. He dug into a dune for a little coolness, and the whole hill of sand came down and buried him alive. And he lived only because the vizier's geomancy saw him under the earth, and the old king himself rode out at the head of the search. And when they charged Asman Pari with it, she would not so much as blush. I volunteered for the search party, she said. Did I not? He tried again, and this time it was the very land that was enchanted. For every day's march, at dusk, brought him back to the same campstone he had started from. Round and round and round. He broke it only by water, a spear drawn from a riverbed where it had been anchoring the storms, a raft poled across, 7 magic wolves whose skins became his winter cloak. And still, the marvels of that place carried him not out, but deeper in. Qaf's map is a ring with no edge. By now you should trust no map at all, and then the cruelest turn of it. A demon named Arnaris offered him a fair bargain, at last, between 2 desperate creatures. "Fly me home," said Hamza, "and I will win you the fairy Lanissa, whom you love." And it was done. A wedding brokered by the one man in all the worlds who could not get home to his own. And that very night, in a jewelled fort, while the newlyweds rejoiced, Asman-Pari came down upon them in her red robes, her colour of rage children, learned to dread it with an army. Anais and Lanissa were beaten and chained and thrown, living into the dungeon of Solomon, and a proclamation was nailed across the whole sky of Qaf. Whoever helps the Amir leave shares that cell. And Hamza waited 3 days at the meeting stone for a friend already lying in the dark, and a green light found him there, and a voice within it, gentle and grave. "She has buried them, Sahib Kiran," it said. "Your road is not closed, but it is longer than your grief, and it runs through hers. Endure. Remember those 2 prisoners, children, chained together in the dark and still alive. Qaf, in its cruelty, was breeding the very thing that would one day undo it. But do not ask me how tonight. So count with me what victory had paid him. A king's gratitude, spent. A wedding, endured. And a daughter, loved entirely. That is the trap set inside the trap, that even a prison will grow things you cannot bear to leave. Sleep now. The lamp is low. 12 years are gone, and far away, on the walls of a fort in the world he left, a princess is about to ask a certain thief the one question he has been dreading for 10 years and more. Tomorrow I will take you there. This part is hers. It was always going to be hers. For the war of the forts had stopped being an adventure and become a life. 8 years turned to 12. Fort after fort was taken and drained like a water skin, and the enemy, having learned at last what it cost him to meet Amar in the open, no longer met him in the open at all. He fought now only by treachery, by night, by tunnel, by the bought word. Amar took the fort of Salasil disguised as a wandering holy man, selling mystical nonsense to a star-struck boy prince named Bahman, 14 years old, kind, and far too ready to believe. Mark that boy's face, children. The tale is not finished spending him. He took the iron fort of Devdad, carried in through the gate in a water carrier's bucket, playing a captured merman for the guards. But this time the water carrier did not come home, and Amar wrote a page in his little book that he no longer read aloud. And the princess herself was no ornament in all this. When Jopin, still besieging, still hopelessly in love, seized her bridle on a fort march to press his suit, Mir Nagar opened his scalp with her own dagger before her guards could so much as turn. She was the fort's second blade, and any man who filed her under the word prize did so at his peril. The enemy camp had come to sleep in shifts by daylight in their armour, a whole army besieged by the reputation of one man, even their own trickster, sent to cut Amar's throat in his sleep, was found under Amar's very bed and folded away into the magic sack like so much laundry. Then Baktak, scolded across 9 years of failure, unleashed his son. Bakhtiarak forged a royal letter and bought a grandee of the fort itself, one Kavaja Arbab, and had him dig a tunnel from his own house to the enemy's camp. 10,000 men waiting to come up out of the floor, and the whole plot died of a daughter. For Arbab had a child, Dilavez, and she weighed her father's ambition against the lives of the fort's children, and chose the children. She wrote her warning left-handed, so the hand would not be known, sealed it with the press of a coin, and sent it out by her nurse in the dark. The saga is full of women, children, who choose the right thing sideways, and this one earned her name in a single night. So Amar came to the feast, not as a spy, but as the guest of honour. "We've come for the religious observance, Kavaja," he told the traitor, smiling. "Surely you were expecting us." And he had Arbab trust at his own dinner table. And down in the dark, at the mouth of the tunnel, stood Adi, pulling the enemy's champions up out of the earth one by one as they emerged, silent as a man pulling turnips from a field. 400 he took before the alarm ever sounded. Jopin put his head up out of the hole, judged the situation with rare and sudden wisdom, and went back down. And the tunnel was filled in, with its investors' ambitions still inside it. But now, children, the tale turns strange. The roof of the fort, at dusk. Mihrnigar, 12 years thinner, the betrothal ring gone loose upon her finger, had been coaxed up at last for a breath of air. Her friend, Zura of Egypt, sat beside her. Her nurse Fitna Bano fussed at her shawl, and a black cloud came rolling in against the wind, with lightning inside it like veins under a skin. And out of that cloud reached a hand the size of a door, and it closed upon Zura and lifted her off the roof and was gone, between two heartbeats. Gone. High above the world, Zura found herself upon a flying throne, demanding of the empty air who had dared, and the air answered her, apologetic as a clerk. "Asman Pari commanded us to fetch Mihrnigar. You were sitting beside her. Errors do occur." That is the horror of Qaf at its purest, children, a kingdom that will steal the wrong woman off a roof and file it as paperwork. And in the far garden of Iram, the fairy queen circled her captive and saw the mistake. "You are not Mihrnigar," she said. "No," answered Zura. "God is kind." But the queen kept her anyway, half a hostage, half a guest, wholly a thing to bargain with, and drew the coal of Solomon along Zura's eyes, so that she too could now see every hidden thing. Remember that, children. That coal will do its work when its hour comes. For the fort had learned upon that roof what you already know, that the war of Qaf and the war of the earth had become a single war, and that a fairy queen across the edge of the world now knew Mihrnigar's name and her very roof. And down on the plain below, for the space of one long breath, a rider dressed all in orange sat his horse and watched the place where the hand had come down, then turned and rode away into the shimmer of the heat. But it was not the hand out of the cloud that broke her. It was the waiting after it. One taunt too many, drifting up nightly from the siege lines, Jopin's heralds, crying it into the dark. 12 years, princess, and he has taken a new wife in fairyland. The cruelest weapon of all, children, because it was true, and no one inside those walls could say it was not. And at the black hour of one night, Mihrnigar took a horse and a veil, and rode out of the story's protection, 100 miles gone by morning, and then the tale did for her what it so rarely does for its women. It gave her a road of her own. A falconer king named Ilyas tore off her veil by force and set her up in his palace, and she told him, level as a drawn blade, "Come near me, and one of us dies. I am indifferent to which." An old merchant who had known her as a child broke her out by night, and paid for it with his life while she watched from cover, her first grief of the road, and not her last. Hunger, a melon field, a tiger in the night jungle that took her horse out from under the very tree she slept in, and at the end of it all, a wayside holy man's hearth, where the princess of the 7 realms, unknown, ended up running the whole household. Steel-spined, useful, alive. Everything Hamza survived by miracle. Children, she survived by nerve. And it was Amar who found her, who had tracked her for weeks through a dozen disguises, and who at last simply sat down across the holy man's threshold as a ragged pilgrim and took the disguise off. No trick. The 2 most stubborn souls in all the saga looked at one another. "The fort's still there," he told her. "So is the vow. I'd have led with an apology, but I've forgotten which of us owes it." 12 years, Amar," she said. "Even God's patience has chapters." And then he reached into his magic sack and drew out a letter, sealed and worn with the road. The letter he had stolen at the very door of Qaf and never delivered. "He wrote you this," Amar said, "and I never gave it, because it read like a goodbye, and I do not deliver those. Read it as a promise instead. He is coming, princess, and when he comes, do not tell him I made you cry. He'll never let me hold the notebook again." She read it under the holy man's lamp. We do not hear the words. We only watch her face pass through 12 years in the space of a breath and fold the paper along lines that will never wear out. And she rode home beside Amar at dawn. So the princess came back to her tower, not because the road defeated her children. The road, in the end, was afraid of her. She came back because a vow is also a road, and she had walked further down it than anyone alive. Sleep now. The lamp is low. For in Qaf, that same season, her rival was burning a city to the ground to keep 1 man, 2 loves, 2 roads, and a mountain standing between them. And it is to that mountain, tomorrow, that we go. Here is the law that Qaf forgot, children. An oath is a knot tied in God's own rope. Break it, and it is not the rope that frays. Watch now what a single broken promise cost a kingdom, and what walked out of its deepest dungeon at the last on 4 rose-coloured legs. You remember that Asman-Pari, queen of the fairies, had sworn before the very saints of heaven to carry Amir Hamza home to the world of men. And now he stood before her throne in the garden of Iram, formal and terrible, and held her to that oath. And her answer was the same it had always been. 1 more year, she said, only 1 more. So he went over her head to her father, the fairy king Shahpal, and the king ordered an escort of 4 devs to bear the Amir home. But Asman-Pari, her daughter Quraisha's hand held tight in her own, watched him choose the litter over them both, and reached out, unseen, and corrupted the escort in mid-flight. But mark this, children. Hamza had learned the grammar of Qaf by now. High above the clouds he heard the devs whispering their treachery, and he ordered them back to the throne and commanded them to swear their road by Solomon himself. And they could not. They could not say the name. And there, in open court, the queen's deceit stood stripped naked before her father's eyes. The king's fury at his daughter crashed against his terror of losing her, and the realm chose the coward's peace. None in all of Qaf might carry the Amir home. So Hamza, done at last with thrones, walked alone into the wilderness, his wolfskin cloak about him, and the dimming bread loaf of the saint in his hand. And at the gate he turned. "Keep your escorts, King of Kings," he said. "God's wilderness keeps its oaths better than the palaces of Qaf." The wilderness road brought him to a green city and to its lord, Sab's Kaaba, the elder brother of King Shahpal himself, and to a face he knew, Raihan Pari, whom he had once freed from an enchantment's prison. And Sab's Kaaba made him Qaf's oldest offer, and made it honestly. "Wed my daughter," he said, "and my house will bear you to the world of men, proclamation or no." And Hamza, weighing that offer against 12 long years away from his own Mihr Nigar, accepted. a small wedding, and a kind one. Two people who did not love each other, both knowing exactly what it was. "To the road home, husband," said the bride, dry as dust. Asman Pari's answer came at dawn in her robes of red. Her army fell on that green city like a sky coming down, and by noon the city was smoke. Her own uncle and her own cousin she bound before her throne. 1,000 lashes a day, and the days did not stop. And then she cast Raihan Pari down into the dungeon of Solomon, where others who had helped the Amir already lay rotting in the dark. Shahpal came too late and fell weeping at his own brother's feet, and Sab's Kaaba, flogged and robbed of his city, limped to the gate of the garden of Iram and cursed the house of Shahpal before God. The curse took the shape that cruelty always breeds. A demon called Rad the Deceitful, raised to honour no oath at all, heard that Qaf's own Devslayer had walked out on its throne. So he flew upon the garden of Iram in Solomon's own stolen net, and seized everything, the king, the court, the queen, the child, everyone, save the old vizier alone. In a single night, the realm that had jailed every soul who helped Hamza lay itself in chains, and the old vizier's divining dice found the Amir at the foot of a mountain, and the very man whose clever arguments had built that first false wedding fell down at the feet of the man his cleverness had caged. And Hamza's answer was hard as the mountain behind him. "Your oaths were false, Kavaja," he said, "everyone. Why should my sword be truer than your word?" And then he went anyway. That, children, is why the tale is his, and no other man's. He heard 3 words: Croatia is taken, and he was already walking. The child, not the kingdom. The child. The demon's fortress fell, and the demon's head with it, and the royal house of Qaf was set free by the very man it had proclaimed against, and no one could meet his eyes. Shahpal could not, and Asman Pari, for the first time in all that season, had nothing to say. Hamza asked one wage, and only one. Open the dungeon, and even now, the court began to hedge. So he turned his back on them and walked away. Then came the long wandering and the wonders of it. He freed a strange people of the cow-shaped feet from a demon's siege with a single war cry. But here the coldest thing in all this telling. For the crime of helping him, that cow-footed city was destroyed, and the hand that destroyed it was Quraisha's, sent by her own mother. Hamza woke to ashes and learned his own child was now the enforcer of the proclamation against him. She was not her mother. She was her mother's weapon, and she knew it. On the 40th morning the bread and the flask of the saint were gone. Empty cloth, empty flask. And Hamza laughed, the first time in all this sorrow, for that was the promised sign. When these vanish, the road turns home. That road ran, of course, straight through the belly of the beast, the palace of Solomon's wonders, 39 chambers of dreaming enchantment. On the 40th day, the 40th door locked. A fairy guard refused him the key with the last of Qaf's authority. He took it from her hands like fruit from a bowl, and the dungeon of Solomon was opened. Thousands of chained devs and jinns and fairies lifted their heads into his pearl light, and one word ran down the dark like wind through wheat. The earthquake of Qaf. And he cut every last shackle in that place. Every prisoner the proclamation had made, freed by the one it was made against. And then, hoofbeats, where no horse had any right to be. Ashkar Devzad, the rose-coloured colt born of Dev and Fairy, swift as rumour and proud as a prince. He would suffer no rider but Hamza, and guard him like a soldier. A rose-coloured colt, unbroken, dappled as though someone had scattered coins across his hide, came cantering down the corridor and greeted the champion of the age with a full-blooded kick that went clean through the armour and sat the Amir down hard in the straw. Then the colt bolted into a black cell, where two voices the Amir knew were weeping. He was their son, born in the dark of the dungeon, a horse of a demon and a fairy, by the strange working of God. And his name was Ashkar. Hamza got up, rubbing his ribs, and looked at that colt with enormous respect. 18 years, he said, and you are the first thing in all of Qaf to strike me honestly. And to the weeping parents, pardoned, all three. Him most of all. So the freed of the dungeon scattered home like a broken constellation, and Hamza turned at last toward the world of men, borne skyward upon a throne. And behind him the red storm rose one final time, Asman Pari, with everything she had left. But the road ahead was suddenly occupied. A small old woman in pilgrim white stood upon the empty air as though upon a doorstep. Asifa Basafa, the mother of the saint, older than the proclamation it protected, older than the throne. She did not fight. She spoke, and the storm could not pass her voice. Daughter of Shahpal, she said, 18 years you have spent his life like your own coin. The account is closed. Go home. Raise your daughter, and learn what he never forgot, that love which locks its doors is only a dungeon with finer furniture. And the red robes were suddenly only cloth. Tell him, Asman Pari began, and nothing followed, for there was nothing that could follow. She turned back. The sky opened toward the south, and far below, the world of men turned green. So, the dungeon gave up its dead, and the curse collected its debt, and the queen, who would not open her hand, found it empty. He is coming home, children. Wipe your eyes. The next lamp I light is for a wedding 18 years overdue. But first, for there is always a but first, 1,000 armed monster stands in the road, holding fast to a friend of ours. Sleep now. There is always one more. 18 years, children. Count them on your fingers, and be glad you run out of fingers before you run out of years. For 18 years, Amir Hamza had been lost in the realm of Qaf, breaking devs and freeing captives, and forgetting, a little more each season, the smell of his own world. And now, at the very last, on the road that led out of Qaf and down into the world, there stood one final toll-keeper. He had 1,000 arms, and I tell you truly, he might as well have had none. His house was a great enclosure of bell metal, set alone in the wilderness, and Hamza's mace opened it the way a good argument opens a closed mind. Inside were gardens laid in rings, one within another, and in the heart of them a pavilion of silk. And in that pavilion the strangest nursery in all this long tale. For there lay a dev infant, 300 yards from crown to heel, asleep in a cradle of gold. And rocking that monstrous cradle was a woman whose face Hamza knew. It was Zura of Egypt, stolen away long ago, the coal of Solomon dark upon her eyes. And here she was, enslaved as nursemaid to a monster's child. She dared not cry out, but Hamza kept with him 2 rescued boys, orphans of Qaf he had taken as his wards, and by them she sent her whisper across the garden, "Tell the wrath of God, Zura of Egypt is here." At that name Hamza came running, and she knew him, as the faithful always know one another by a keepsake carried through all the years, and she wept, and her weeping woke the cradle. The dev baby opened its eyes and lunged, and the great sword, the scorpion, answered on reflex before Hamza had even chosen it. And then, children, the father came home. Samandun, the 1,000-armed, the very paymaster of the monster who had once crashed a wedding and torn Hamza's world in two. He came like a storm that has grown limbs, and he flung stones not by the handful, but by the 100. And the fight that followed was arithmetic, played for awe. Each sweep of the scorpion, and with each sweep, Hamza cried, "God is great!" reaped hands away by the 500, and Samandun grew them back, and hurled again, and grew back fewer, and hurled again weaker, slower, smaller, until the last of the 1,000 arms dropped into the dust and lay still. And with that arm, children, the realm of Qaf was, at long last, empty of monsters. Zuhra was free, and the coal of Solomon upon her eyes had made of her a seer. For now she could look up into the empty sky and see, folded within it, the road that ran home. So there she stood, pointing at nothing at all, while everyone else politely aimed their faith at the nothing she pointed to. Ashkar, the rose-red horse, took the wind beneath him, and below them, at last, green and gentle and impossible, lay the world. Now hear how a hero comes home. He came to the fort of the Western Dominion, and here is the beat that tells you everything you need to know about the man. He did not ride in trailing his miracles behind him. He sent his companions ahead by the long road. He turned Ashkar loose to graze and said only, "Do not get yourself captured. I mean it." And then he sat down beneath the walls in dust and a wolfskin and became a beggar, a fakir. For after 18 years he wanted to see them first before they saw him. And maybe, children, I will only whisper it, maybe he was afraid. Even heroes are allowed one door they hesitate at. Up on the roof of that fort was Nigar. 18 years of mourning had worn into her like a groove worn into a step. And beside her was Amar the thief, Amar the trickster, coaxing her up into the air with the oldest medicine he had, which is an omen. And she took up her bow and strung it with the ease of a woman who had not once, in all those years, let the skill go slack. "Geese," she said, "3 of them. If I take the middle one out of the sky, he comes home today. And if I miss, you won't," said Amar. And for once in his life he was not gambling. She loosed. The arrow took the middle goose clean out of heaven, and goose and arrow fell together, down past the wall, and landed at the feet of a dusty fakir, who picked up the shaft and read the name cut into the wood, Mihr Nigar, and kissed it. Now down storms Amar to fetch back the omen, and finds a beggar kissing the princess's own arrow. He demands it. He is laughed at. "Away with you, little trickster. I have been robbed by professionals." He throws a stone, and watches the beggar catch it, one-handed, out of the air, and return it hard enough to open a crater in the dust at his feet. He offers a bribe, and is refused. "I have given away more than your whole bag ever held in a place you could never run to." And Amar goes back up those stairs thoroughly rattled, to report that a fakir with impossible shoulders holds the arrow and claims to carry word from Hamza himself. Mihr Nigar demands the man be brought, but Amar smells a trap in everything, having set so many himself, and so he sends down a serving woman, Fitna Bano, veiled and dressed as the princess. And the fakir, without so much as lifting his eyes, waves the false one away. "Bring me," he says, "the one who shot the goose." For no disguise had ever once worked upon Amar, and no disguise, children, ever works upon Hamza's heart. That the two of them share this, that is the whole point of it. So she came to the wall herself, veiled, and upon the hand that held the edge of her veil was a ring, his ring, given 18 years before. The fakir rose to his feet. He took off the turban, and 18 years of dust and wilderness came away with it, and both of them fainted, both at once, gracelessly, completely, like 2 struck bells falling silent together, the princess and the hero,
laid out flat in the dust, and between them, upright and alone, the king of the Ayars, looking helplessly from one fallen legend to the other. I held the walls, said Amar, to the sky and to no one. For 18 years I held the walls. Somebody else can deal with this part. Then they were revived, and the gates were flung wide, and the roar of the garrison rolled out across the plain until it reached the marching column of the companions, and the column roared back. Mukbil found his Zura, betrothed long ago, and alive after all. Old black constellation, white now at the muzzle, pressed his forehead to Hamza's chest. The parting of long ago made good. And around them all galloped young Ashkar, rose-red and jealous, the future arriving in circles around the past. And that night, upon the very wall where she had shot the goose, Hamza said to her only, "You waited."
And Mihanigar turned to him and gave him back the words he had left her with, kept all those years like a letter kept in a box. "Whatever will be, you said." And then, softly, "It was." So the long road home ran out at last, under a wall, in beggar's clothes, at the feet of an arrow with her name carved in it. Rest tonight, children. The next lamp I light will be the wedding lamp. 18 years late, and worth, I promise you, every single one of the years. Every one. Well, almost every one. Tonight the lamp burns sweet oil, and I will light a second beside it. The only tale in all my telling that earns 2 lamps. For tonight there is a wedding. And a wedding, children, is where the story stops to count what has survived. It began with peacocks. 3 of them came down into a meadow near the fort. Birds of a plumage no earthly hen ever wore. And they strutted, and they watched, and when a man drew near they were simply gone. Amar, who has never in his life trusted an ornamental bird, laid a snare for them, and he caught nothing at all, save a note in a hand he could not read. But Hamza could read it, and what it said was this: "Qaf is watching, expect gifts." They came in state the next day. First the vizier and the captain of the fairy court, and behind them, along a road her fairy servants unrolled out of the very horizon, came Asman-Pari herself, the sky fairy, the other wife, the queen of the unseen, with the young girl Quraisha at her side, seeing for the first time the world to which her father belonged. And Asman-Pari brought the impossible as her wedding gifts: the pavilion of Solomon, the drum of Solomon, chests upon chests out of the treasury of Qaf. She furnished her rival's wedding as only a queen could furnish it, magnificently, so that no soul alive could ever whisper that she had been made small. And Hamza received her with every honour. But mark how he sat, children, for the whole of a marriage that failed is in this one small courtesy. She offered him her throne, and he would not take it. He sat instead on the chair beside it, a guest of her grace, and king of nothing that was hers. Now Amar had spent 18 years hearing Hamza speak of a fairy queen for a wife, and had believed not one word of it. So when he was summoned to marvel at the pavilion, he said loudly that he doubted this Asman-Pari existed at all. 18 years of my other wife is a fairy queen, he cried. Produce her! And so she had the coal of Solomon drawn along his eyelids, the same black line that had been drawn on the infant Hamza's eyes in the first hour of this whole tale, and the king of the tricksters saw. He saw the devs standing over the plain like weather come to ground. He saw the fairy folk like candle flames with opinions of their own. He saw the entire invisible nation that had been jostling past his shoulder for years unnumbered, and never once been seen. And Amar, who has an answer for everything under heaven, was silent for the longest moment of his crafty life. And then, at last, in a small and businesslike voice, he asked, "And how much would a bottle of this cost?" And the fairy's laughter carried across the meadow. But the sweetest thing that happened that night, children, happened in the shadows. On the eve of the wedding, they fed the beggars at the gate, as is right. And among the mendicants, there sat 7 fakirs in patched wool, and at the centre of the 7, his brow marked, a rosary in his hand, wrapped in the rags of the poor, sat the king of kings of the 7 realms, Naushavan, the emperor who had fought this marriage for 18 years with armies, and with forgeries, and with hired knives in the dark. He could not stay away from his daughter's wedding, and he could not, for all the world, attend it as himself. Amar knew him in the time it takes to pour a cup of wine. And here, children, here is why the tale loves Amar above every clever man who ever drew breath. He said nothing. He seated the old fakir with honour, where he could see everything and be seen by no one. He served him with his own 2 hands. And when the old man rose to slip away with a beggar's blessing on his lips, Hamza breathed a word in the secret tongue of the tricksters, and the fakir was moved, gently, without a name spoken, up to the high arcade, and cushioned there, and given the finest view in all the fort of the ceremony below. And so a father watched his daughter married from the shadows of a borrowed poverty. Below him, 4 hours before the dawn, old Buzurg Mer performed the rite. Buzurg Mer, who serves this same emperor, and who has spent his whole long life quietly shielding his master's enemy. And if you remember one thing of this night, children, remember the emperor's face, up in that dark arcade, lit only by his own daughter's wedding lamps. He left before dawn, and told no one. Whether the bride ever knew her father had come, the tale does not say, and neither will I. Only this, that after, she looked up once at the empty arcade, and then she looked away. Now at daybreak the groom was summoned to the bridal palace, and found the first door barred. For there stood Asman Pari, her arms folded, the one authority in all this saga that Hamza could not fight and would not. And she charged him a bride price at every threshold. 7 doors, 7 demands, and he paid every one of them, without a word of argument. Let that be the law of the scene. At the first doors, the treasure of Qaf handed back to her again, for she had not come for wealth. Then pledges, and escorts, and honours for the bride's own household, for she had not come for those either. And at the 6th door she asked for the scorpion of Solomon, his sword, the blade that had slain the devs, and he laid it flat across both his palms and gave it up. And at the 7th door, very quietly, she said only, the horse, black constellation, the gift of heaven from his boyhood, grown old now, white about the muzzle, and he put the reins into her hand. She took the 2 things that had made him a legend in both of the worlds, and it was not spite, children. She was carrying home to Qaf the proof that he had once been hers, because she could not carry him. Then, with the 7th door open behind her, not looking at him at all, she said, "Go in, Sahib Kiran. You were only ever passing through my life to reach this room. The sword, I will hang it where the morning sun will strike it." And she was gone before the wedding song had ended, the carpeted road rolling itself up behind her, and only the pavilion of Solomon left standing, the gift too vast to be anything but farewell. And then, at last, Hamza went in, and Mir Nigar was unveiled to him in the lamplight, with the necklace at her throat that he had sent her long ago, and the goose arrow and the worn old letter laid in the keepsake box beside her mirror. Every token of 18 years of waiting gathered into one small chest. And for one unhurried hour, 2 people were simply, quietly married. And there followed a golden year. A son was born to them, Qubad, and the fort roared louder than it ever had in any battle. Amar was wed at last to his fitna bano, and the old date and the 2 walnuts he had once been teased with came back to him on a cushion of silk, and for once in his life the trickster had no answer at all. Muqbil wed his Zura the same season, and through it all Landhaur taught the infant to grip a mace, and Adi taught him disastrously to eat 1 golden year, let it glow. So the hawk and his princess came home to a single roof, and for 1 round turning of the year the whole realm ran clean out of villains with the nerve to trouble them. Learn now the hardest arithmetic of the story, children. Joy is not the reward waiting at the end of the road. Joy is the road, and it is paid for, every mile of it. Sleep well tonight, while the lamps are sweet, for we ride again at dawn. Here is the trick that history plays upon the fortunate children. It lets them win, completely, publicly, and then it waits, patient as a spider, for them to put their swords away. For the golden year had come round at last, and it ended the way golden years always end, with everyone believing it could be made to last forever. Hear now what came to pass in Ctesiphon. Shahpal, the man who had feared 1 boy out of Mecca the whole length of his reign, was old now and tired, and for 1 astonishing season, sincere. And he did a thing no teller expected of him. He called the court together, and set the crown of the 7 realms not upon his own head, nor upon any Persian prince, but upon a child, upon Qubad, his own grandson and Hamza's son. Think on it. The prophecy that Shahpal had fought for 40 years was not defeated. It was adopted. The 2 bloodlines, the hawks and the kings, were poured into 1 small boy, and the boy was crowned. And to Persian-Islamic, quietly, the old king spoke the saddest wisdom of that whole sweet year. I fought the hawk 40 years, he said. Let me at least die its grandfather's friend. And so Shahpal turned toward prayer. Hamza and Mihanigar watched their son take a throne beneath the banners of both their houses. And even Baktak, sleek, patient, poisonous Baktak, was made to bow before a king of kings who was half of the house of Hashim. Now let me tell you of this boy, for you must love him quickly. You have only 2 nights. He was a child who wore his great crown crooked. He worshipped his father the way small boys do, from the ankles up. He sparred in the yard with the handle of a champion's mace, too big for his hands, and he ruled with the disarming honesty that only a child king possesses. Grandfather Vizier Baktak, he asked once before the whole divan, why do the petitioners fear you so? I shall go and ask them myself. And the court held its breath, and Baktak smiled a smile with no warmth in it at all. And the boy king was tested, as all kings are. For Bahman, do you remember the boy prince of the fortress of Salisil from the Long War? He was a grown man now, and an ambitious one, and he rose against the new order. So the child Qubad rode out to meet him, and Hamza and the rose-coloured horse Ashkar were held back, deliberately, in reserve, watching, and the boy won. He won his first battle before he had grown his first beard, and his father stood in the reserve line prouder than he had ever been of any triumph of his own. Bahman knelt and confessed his fault, and took the faith, and was forgiven. For that was the family's way, mercy handed down to a 2nd generation. But mark this, children, for the boy could not. Bahman rose from his knees and carried his grievance away, and filed it in the one place where you and I can see it, and the child king never could, in his heart. And so the machinery of grief began to turn softly, where nobody was looking, under the crown, behind the smile, inside the family. Now, far off in Abyssinia, a raider named Shaddad had been taken and converted and released. and had at once seized the retired old Naushavan and shut him in an iron cage and carried him away. And with the old king caged abroad, and Hamza summoned off to his father's affairs, Baktak reached at last for his masterpiece. He forged a letter, a royal letter, sealed and perfect, and in it was written the lie that Hamza was dead abroad in some distant country, that his followers should be slaughtered, and Mihnigar given over in marriage to Bahman. And Baktak dropped this forgery into the two hands most hungry to believe it, into Bahman's, and into the hands of Jopin, that old humiliated suitor, who had wanted Mihnigar since before the tale began. And Jopin laid a feast, a banquet, he said, to mourn the anniversary of the death of the late Amir Hamza, and to it he invited the champions, and the young King Qubad, and all the family, to be toasted and taken. The wine, the candles, the smiling guards, a trap dressed as a kindness. And that whole clever machine broke itself against the one thing the villains never thought to reckon with, against Mihnigar. She was asked to grace the gathering for the honour of her presence. And she came, and she read the room in a single slow look, the smiles that sat wrong on the faces, the guards too stiff, their boots too new for men who merely serve at feasts. She said nothing, and in the middle of the courses, with nothing but perfect courtesy, she called for her conveyance, and rose, and took the boy king out with her under the cover of good manners. 12 years of nerve, spent in 90 seconds of pure protocol. The trap closed upon empty air, and Jopin, humiliated twice over, threw off all pretense. Open war now, his army and Bahman's and Baktak's gold behind them both. The war pressed the faithful hard, while Hamza was still upon the road home. And then, at a way camp in the dark, Hamza woke with his heart beating wrong in his chest. He did not wait for his escort. He took only Amar, and rode ahead into the night, and came upon the battle as his own line was buckling, and turned it, as he always turned it, by arriving. And out of the crush came Bahman, whom the boy had beaten and the father had pardoned, and he swung a great two-handed sword at the unguarded side of the day and opened Hamza's head to the bone. The blood blinded him. The world tilted, and Bahman did not stay to make sure of his work. He fled the field shouting his boast ahead of him, "I have killed Hamza! I have killed Hamza!" And the boast outran the truth, as boasts always do. And now, children, came the hour the rose-coloured colt had been born for. For Hamza, sliding out of his saddle, bleeding, spoke to his horse in the tongue of the jinns. 2 words only. Son, away. And Ashkar became the whole of the rescue. He fought clear with heel and tooth. He found river crossings no horse should have known. He ran the pursuit off the edge of the night, until the water at his knees ran red, and his rider slid down gently into the shallows. And at first light a poor goat-herd found them. Siah Sher was his name, unlettered, penniless, and certain of one thing only, that here was a great man, and that he was dying. He carried them to his hut, and washed the terrible wound with what a goat-herd has to hand, and Ashkar stood at the door like a beast carved on a king's shield, and let no living thing pass for 7 days, while Hamza lay in the lamplight and mended on goat broth and kindness. And when at last Hamza woke and spoke his own name, it was the goat-herd's old mother who answered, pledging the whole service of her house with the fearlessness that only the very poor can afford. Remember them, children. Kings failed him. Converts betrayed him. A goat-herd, and his mother did not. And Amar was already coming. He read the blood trail across a hostile country as though it were written text, until at last the Zambil bag dropped in a hut doorway, and the king of the Ayars stood looking at his milk brother, alive. And for once in his long, laughing life, Amar made no jest at all.
he only sat down in the doorway, like a man whose knees had been dismissed from duty. Then Miha Nigar came with the army and stood at that humble door, the survivor of 100 terrors, meeting at last the one thing she had feared above all others, and mastering it. The goatherd was rewarded past all his understanding, and Hamza climbed back into the saddle, scar upon scar, and rode to reform his broken line. The war was balanced again. Bahman's boast lay exposed, and the family gathered around one more fire, whole. The boy king asleep against his father's shoulder, his crown set down in the grass. Hold this picture, children. Hold it. For the Dastan now asks of me the 3 pages I have never once read aloud without stopping. Come to me tomorrow all the same. Grief shared around a lamp is grief halved, and he will need us all there. See, I do not put the lamp out tonight. I leave it burning and close the book around the shadow of its flame.
The tellers who weigh their words, children, weigh these pages heaviest of all. 3 bereavements in a single season. I will read them as the Dastan wrote them, without mercy and without despair. Stay close to the lamp. The first grief came dressed as hospitality. In the far north, among the gardens of Kashmir, a remnant of the enemy had taken shelter, and Hamza sent his eldest son to break them. Amr, the son of the Greek princess, a young man now with his father's face and his father's word. And at the height of the siege, there came, out of the trees, a wild ass, that beast that fate sends when a thread is about to be cut. Amr gave chase, as young men do, and the chase carried him far from his champions, and stranded him at Farkar, the city of gardens. And there a woman named Gulchahra looked down from her balcony, and saw him, and decided, in the space of one look, to keep him. She pressed him with feasting, and with wine, and at the last with her own arms. But Amr would not turn. "A sister of yours is married to my father," he said. "I will not do a deed against the law." He deflected her with courtesy. He stalled her with counsel he did not need. And when at last she wound herself around him, drunk, he answered with a slap, half in scandal, half in play. And then, children, the ugliest logic in the world. For she had a proverb ready, and she made it her confession. "Neither yours nor mine," she said. "Throw it in the fire." And she took up a sword, and over her own crime she raised the shriek, "Who has killed the Amir's son?" As though grief itself could hide the hand that struck. But Addy came, and Addy counted aloud. No enemy had entered. The doors were hers. The grief was the alibi, and she confessed with a simplicity that chills the blood to this day. I was in the grip of love. Punish me. Yet the companions could not lift a hand, for a man does not strike a woman, and so their own code held them helpless, and they only bound her and sent her to her own brother, who cleaned his house's name off in the dark. Now hear how the news travelled. For Hamza dreamed his son lying in a pool of blood, and woke, and sent Amar. And Amar came to Farkar, and learned everything, and tore his collar, and then did the thing that his whole strange soul was made for. He went back to Hamza, and he lied. "Wounded," he said. "In Farkar, he asks for you. Ride." And on the road, one garden short of the truth, he stalled again. "Rest here an hour. Eat something first." For a man should not hear such news hungry. That was the last con of the trickster, the tenderest deception in all the Dastan, to put bread in his master before the blow fell. He slaughtered a goat there for kebabs, in a garden that belonged to a giant, and the giant came storming in over his stolen goat swinging a mace of 17,000 pounds. And Hamza, not even rising from where he sat, caught the giant, and wrestled him, and flattened him into the grass. And the old strong man, from underneath, asked the seated stranger his name, and heard it, and laughed at the perfection of his own defeat, and swore himself Hamza's man on the spot. He opened his mouth to speak of the sun, but Amar's hand rose and silenced him, and so the whole conspiracy of kindness widened by one more stranger. Then the city gate, the companions' faces. Your son has been killed. And Hamza went very quiet. Children, the way the sea goes out before it comes back in. 40 days of mourning. And the Greek princess, shown her son's murderer, said only 2 words, "Alas, my son," and followed him into the ground before the season was out. 1 sentence in the book. And the unfairness of it, children, is the whole point. The second grief wore the trickster's own craft, turned inside out. Far to the south, a queen begged Hamza to rescue her lord, the old emperor Naushirvan, caged by an Abyssinian king. Amar counselled against it. But because a queen had asked, and because mercy in Hamza was a reflex before it was a choice, he went with Mukbil, and the desert swallowed them both in delay. And while he was lost out there, the caged emperor and his captor reconciled, the oldest key in the world opening that cage from the inside, a plot to seize Hamza's own wife, Mihunigar, with her father's blessing. For sentiment, children, does not survive being held too close to power. And into the sleeping camp, at midnight, walked an assassin of the old kings, with an offer already accepted, the heads of the Arab chiefs, one by one. The tent he chose was the boy king's, Hamza's grandson, Qubad. 2 guards named Victory and Triumph stood watch and saw nothing. A tent peg lifted, a shadow's work. I will not show you the blade, only the lamp inside the tent going dark, and the crown upon its cushion, and the shadow slipping out into the waiting arms of Amar's men who took him alive. Then the camp woke to its doomsday. Adi's roar, Landhaur on his knees, and Mihunigar over her son, her heart charred in the fire of her grief. And far away in his own capital, the old emperor mourned the grandson his own word had bought. And the grief was entirely sincere. Black banners rose on both horizons at once, and the war itself fell silent under the weight of a sorrow both sides shared. And now, children, the third grief, the one that widowed the whole story. The rites ended, the fighting resumed, and Hamza and Amar came back at last out of the desert. The joy of that reunion curdling in real time as the field emptied around one running figure. For while every sword was turned outward, an old suitor walked in through the undefended gate. Jopin. 18 years of refusals behind him. He killed the guards. He entered her rooms, and Mihunigar fought. The markswoman, the survivor of 100 sieges. She put arrow after arrow into him until his breast was full of holes like a wasp's nest, and Jopin, dying on his feet, refused to the very last, swung once out of the pure bottom of his spite. Hamza was there. A breath late, as the story is always a breath late. His answer opened the suitor from skull to pelvis, but it was grief, not triumph, and the camera does not leave her face. They sent for the wise old vizier. He did not come in time, and she went to live, the tellers say, among the houris, with the necklace at her throat and his ring upon her hand. And Hamza fell across her with one loud groan, and the light went out of him. For 21 days he was mad, laughing, weeping, unmoored, and Amar did not once leave the tent door. And on the 22nd day he woke and asked, "Where am I? What has happened?" And they told him, all of it. 3 coffins were carried to a meadow near Mecca, the son, the grandson, the wife, and the whole cast walked behind them, and a keepsake box was set upon her grave, a necklace, a letter, a single goose-feathered arrow. He gave his conquest to a grandchild and sent the boy to Egypt. He dismissed his companions to their kingdoms, each refusal overruled. And when Amar begged, "Do not make me leave you," Hamza gave him the gentlest wound in the whole Dastan. Muqbil stays. Muqbil is quiet. Go and be loud, brother, somewhere the world still needs it. Then he shaved his head and put on the robe of a beggar and took up a broom and swept her tomb and slept at its foot. And Ashkar, the great horse, grazed the edge of that meadow, unsaddled. The tellers say he swept her tomb as attentively as once he had broken kingdoms, and that none who saw the beggar of the meadow ever again used the word invincible of any man. But the Dastan, children, does not end in the meadow. 2 lamps remain. Come back, not for battles, for what is left when the battles are done, for the answer to grief. The Dastan swears there is one. A man who has given the world away, children, believes the world is done with him, but the world is never done. It sends debtors, it sends jackals, and sometimes, patient as an orange tree, it sends what has loved you all along. You left him last night in a meadow with a broom in his hands. The lion made a lamb by grief. The Sahib Kiran, who had laughed in the face of devs, now sweeping the dust from a tomb, month upon month, and speaking to no one. For Muqbil, the faithful one, kept the only company that grief can bear, which is silence. But word travels. The tail of the retired lion crossed the hills, and 2 old hatreds lifted their heads to hear it. The first was a warlord named Karun bin Farhad, who had a debt of blood to settle. And the second I ask you to look at kindly, for a single breath. Kuliat bin Gilim, the son of the assassin who was torn apart for the murder of Qubad. His grief, children, was as real as Hamza's. The saga keeps an honest ledger. Vengeance breeds vengeance, and every justice leaves a mourner. And so Kuliat came to the tomb, not with a sword, but with a bow, dressed as a wandering darvish, serving at the graveside for days, humble, unwatched. And then he poured the water, the drugged water, offered with a servant's bow. It was the Ayah's own craft, children. The very move you have watched Amar work for 18 nights, turned now against its masters. And the sacrilege of it is that it worked. Hamza and Muqbil woke in chains. They had built a pillar for him, 120 yards of it, raised for one purpose, and they hung to the refuge of the world at its head, with bells fastened to his limbs, so that every movement of his agony would ring out like music for the men who had come to enjoy it. Camel hide and salt and the daily whip. I will tell you no more of the lash than that, children. The horror of that place is not in the whip. It is in the bells, and it is in the face of Muqbil, made to stand at the foot of the pillar and watch, saying nothing, memorizing every face that laughed. And there was one face among them I must name, though it shames the telling. For under an awning, invited, counselled, and comfortable, sat Naushirvan, the king of kings, the man Hamza had lifted back onto his throne not once but twice. The father of the bride from the wedding arcade. He had come to watch his own son-in-law flayed. No forged letter this time. No back-tuck to carry the blame. Only an old emperor, in the shade, watching. That, children, is the last we shall see of him upon his feet. And you must see it clearly, or you will not understand the mercy that comes tomorrow. But Abdul Muttalib's letters were already flying, and though the couriers were hunted, though Amar's own aged father was taken among them, no net catches every bird, and the letters did what letters do. They called in a harvest. Everything that mercy had ever planted now rode toward one meadow. Landhaur's war elephant on one horizon, Farkari's mace on another, Adi and the boy king Sad bin Amr with the lancers of Egypt, every forgiven enemy, every ransomed friend converging on the pillar. And who reached it first? Who else? The whip-bearer had a water carrier that day, a stooped and shuffling servant no one troubled to look at twice, and that servant climbed the pillar and set his knife to the ropes. And for the first time in all this long tale, children, the hands of the king of the Ayars were shaking. He said only 4 words, and his voice was not steady. "Brother, the notebook is full." Then Korun's host closed ranks around its prize, and that, at last, was the moment the tale had owed you since the 10th night. For out of the forest, dust rose 40 pennants, the colour of a setting sun. 40 orange banners, and the veiled one, the masked rider who had haunted the edges of this whole story, unnamed, unthanked, took the field like dawn taking a valley, and where Karun's line had stood, there was simply nothing standing any more. Kuliyat went into the Zambil bag alive. "You," said Amar, "I am keeping. Professional reasons." Karun was handed to Landhaur's justice, and the emperor's awning, when they came to it, was empty. Naushavan had already fled toward Ctesiphon, and toward tomorrow. So they freed him, and they healed him among the great gathered family that his mercy had made. And Hamza went once more to the tomb. He did not make a speech. He swept it a final time, and set the broom against the stone, and mounted Ashkar. For a vow, children, is not a house you must live in forever. A vow becomes, in the end, a direction, and his pointed, at last, back toward the living. Now the orange camp was pitched beside his own, and at dusk the masked rider walked, unheralded, into Hamza's tent. The old courtesies of challenge were spoken, and then Hamza, who had wandered for 18 years, who rode beneath that veil, reached out and drew it aside. Naranj Pari, the veiled one, exiled princess of the fairies. Love to her was service freely given. For 18 years she would keep Hamza's people and speak, when at last unveiled, in the patience of all those years. And there was a face the moon might envy, and the Sahib Kiran, who had laughed at devs, who had wrestled mountains, fainted dead away. Oh, do not laugh too hard, children, or laugh all you like, for it is the last pure jest of the season, and it is spent, fittingly, on the hero himself. Amar knew the remedy, perfume and rosewater, and then, delivered with a physician's grave face, his own prescription. "With respect, madam, kiss him. It is medically indicated." She did, and it worked. Then came the wine and the story. She was Naranj Pari, the Orange Fairy, an exiled princess of Qaf, who had seen the human champion once, long ago, in Shahpal's wars, and had loved him ever after with a love she could never spend. She could not have him, and so she had chosen the road that Asman Pari never could. Not possession, service, in secret. Every impossible rescue of the Qaf years, every one of Amar's 3 salvations, every luckiest day the fort ever knew, had been her hand, working unseen, for 18 years, and never once asking to be thanked. "Asman Pari loved you like a dungeon, Sahib Kiran," she said. "I had no throne to keep you in, so I kept your people instead. It seemed the version of love that would not shame the word." And Hamza said to her the truest thing this whole tale had taught him. "You loved," he said, "the way the free love." And then he turned. "Amar, you once performed a wedding in disguise. Do this one as yourself." So the marriage of the autumn of his life was witnessed by the notebook itself. Amar read the whole long ledger of her secret rescues aloud, as a dowry paid in reverse. And it was the fort's biggest laugh, and then its longest weeping. And the line continued, children, as lines do. There was another road marriage, half a farce, Hamza incognito, and the wedding performed by a suspiciously learned travelling judge who was, beyond all doubt, Amar in a false beard, marrying his own brother off while very nearly winking at you. And years on, the fruit of it, a prince of rum who scattered the army's champions, felling Landhaur, felling Farhad, until Hamza himself stepped out to face him, and a voice of light stopped the duel. The boy is your own. Rustam Piltan, the elephant body, the son who had grown up a stranger and fought his way home into his father's arms. The world part returns what it takes. Children, never the same coin, and in Hamza's embrace of that found son, there was one held breath for the boy who was not there. So the tomb kept its tenant only until the world proved it still needed him. And love turned out to have been riding escort the whole time, in orange, asking for nothing. One lamp left now, and one debt left. The oldest one of all. Sleep, children. Tomorrow, the fire temple, and the hawk, one last time with a crown in its claws. 40 years ago, an emperor lay beneath a crown that hung above his bed like a second moon, and dreamed that a crow of the east stole it away, and a hawk of the west struck the thief apart and laid the crown gently back upon his brow. And that emperor, Naushirvan, king of kings of the 7 realms, woke with a cry, and spent his whole long life fearing the very bird that heaven had sent to save him. Tonight, children, that dream comes true for the 3rd and last time, and tonight you will see at last why heaven chose a hawk, not for the talons, for the eyes that recognize. So listen. Far beyond the rim of the empire stands the fire temple of Nimrod, an eternal flame in a hall of black stone, and priests who tend it and ask no man his name, and at dusk a little charity bread for the poor who gather firewood on the mountains. And to that temple, one evening, came a travelling soldier and his companion, a highwayman once, robber of the roads, now turned to the right path and truer than most honest men. They sat at the pilgrim's edge and ate and watched the poor file in for their loaves. And last of all in that line, under the smallest, meanest bundle of sticks a man ever carried, there shuffled an old man, bent, ragged, older than his years. And the attendant sneered at his poor little load, and took the loaf that was his due, and broke it in half, and gave him only the half. And the old man took that half-loaf in both his hands, as though it were treasure, and thanked him, and crept to a corner to eat it slowly, that it might last. Now the soldier's companion leaned close, and murmured what the temple whispered of him. That one claims he is Naushirvan, poor soul, the king of kings no less. They beat him for it, at first. Now they only feed him, and let him rave. And it was Naushirvan. Children, it was the emperor himself. How he fell, the Dastan does not itemize, and neither shall I. The wheel had simply turned, as wheels do, and the man who had ruled the 7 realms now gathered kindling on a cold mountain for the charity of strangers who did not believe his name. And the travelling soldier, watching, went very still. Then he called the attendant, and bade him take the fine tray that had been laid for himself, and carry it instead to the old man in the corner. But do not speak my name, he said. Say only that a soldier shares his luck tonight. But he could not hold even that distance. In a moment he rose, and went to the old man, and drew him closer, and seated him, this beggar, this ruin, this king of kings. And with his own 2 hands he began to feed him. Small morsels, one at a time, the tenderest pieces first. And all the while the soldier wept, openly, steadily, without shame, the tears running down into his beard as he fed the old man like a child. And the old man, warmed for the first time in seasons, fed and unmocked, wondered at those tears, and asked why a stranger should weep to feed a beggar. And the soldier said, and this was all the truth he could afford to give. "Your face, father, your face reminds me of my father." And when the old man had eaten, he asked timidly his benefactor's name. "A travelling soldier," came the answer, "and no one more. And you, father, what is your name?" And there, did you see it, children? There came the flinch, the fear in the old ruined face. "If I say it," he whispered, "they beat me." But the soldier swore him safe, swore no hand would touch him. And so, at last, small as the half-loaf in his hands, the confession came. "I am Naushavan. I was the king of kings." Silence, only the fire ticking in the great dark hall. And the soldier, who was not a soldier, rose to his feet. And there, before the priests, and the pilgrims, and the mountains, and the everlasting flame, he knelt. He knelt down before the beggar, and laid his forehead upon the old man's hand. "And I," he said, "am the hawk they promised you, refuge of the world. It seems heaven is not yet finished making me return your crown." No, children, the old king did not beg forgiveness for all the years of treachery, for the pillar, for the 40 years of fear. And Hamza did not forgive him in words. The forgiveness was the kneeling. Anything spoken would have spent it. And the old man, fickle to the last, human to the last, weeping now into the hair of the man he had hunted half a lifetime, clung to him and sobbed like a father who had found a lost son. 2 old men, 1 fire, and the dream, at last, come true. The rest is the Dastan's shortest errand, and that is on purpose. The great horse Ashkar cast his shadow over rebel Ctesiphon once more. The family opened its arms one final time, young Rustum, riding his first campaign at his father's side, Amar, staging a coronation the way he had once staged a feast. And Baktak, the poisoner, the forger, the cockroach who had whispered through every part of this tale, was arrested at last by the restored king's own command. The Dastan spends no more oil on him. Amar's little notebook simply shows the page, a name crossed through, and the tally of his banishments. 7. Then the crown was set back upon Naushavan's brow, and the old dreamer's last act as king of kings answered his very first. With hands steadier than they had been all his life, he lifted the crown off again, and held it out over the court, toward the young men who would carry the world next. The empire passed, and the fear that had driven 40 years of plotting died, not by any sword stroke, but by an inheritance. And he turned to Hamza, the last words the old enemies would ever trade. "The vizier read my dream wrong, after all, Sahib Kiran. He said the hawk would restore my crown, and setting it down, you restored the head that wears it. The crown was always the cheap part. Now the dastango turns his pages forward, children, faster than any film can follow, and each page is one lit window on a future you shall not fully see. Here rides Rustum at the head of his own column, east into a story that is a whole other lamp's oil. Here floats an infant on a river in a wooden box, lifted from the water by a young woman in the silks of Qaf, Quraisha, grown now, her mother's power in her hands, and her father's mercy in her face, raising her small half-brother at the command of a light that spoke to her once in a doorway. Here sits Amar, grey at the temples, a hand upon his shoulder, and a horde of grandchildren at his knee, teaching them the 3 rules of the Ayar's craft, and lying outrageously about the pigeon. And far off, at the very edge of the last page, a land of impossible colour behind a shimmering veil. Sorcerers, enchantments, a boy named Asad, not yet born, of the great Tylism called Hoshruba, children, and of what Hamza's grandsons did there. Ask me another year. That lamp needs younger oil than mine. So the book comes to its meadow near Mecca, at dusk. 3 well-kept graves, and a broom leaning against the stone. for someone sweeps here still, whenever the road allows. And Hamza, the old lion, scar-mapped, upright, stands at Mihunigar's stone with a keepsake box beneath his arm, and Naranj Pari waits mounted at the meadow's edge with the patience of a woman who waited 18 years and can surely wait an evening more. He says nothing. He was never the talker. That was the other one's task. He sets down one orange, one, on the shoulder of the grave, and touches the stone, and mounts. And the 3 riders grow small into the evening, the tellers who weigh their words. Children end their weighing here, of the Amir's last road, the road that every mortal rides. The Dastan keeps its silence, and so shall I. Some pages belong to God alone, but the lamp, children, the lamp belongs to whoever tells him next. Take it. Hold it steady. Good. That is the whole of it then. The Dastan of Amir Hamza. Sleep now.